We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And as we're recording this, the news about the Sonos headphones, what was the stupid name now? Sonos Ace. That just happened. We're not prepared to talk about it today.
I heard that everybody's making a butt ton of money on headphones. Therefore, why can't we?
And
released.
I do have the vague details of they're charging $450 for them.
That sounds right.
They look almost exactly like Apple's Max headphones. They look very, very, very similar.
Oh, that's weird.
I know.
Who would have guessed?
Yeah. They decided that an astounding feature that no one else has ever thought of is that they made the inside of one of the ear cups a different color than the other. And they're like, that's how you tell right from left really easily. I'm like, yeah, there's no easier way to do that in a way that
not like you just could put an L or an R on the inside there.
People might get confused as to which color goes to which side of their head, but they are the first.
Now
and
you
only
have to
ones
memorize
to
colors randomly.
That's what you got to do. And then the thing that I did not expect at all, I will have to go through the features in more depth for when we talk about it next week, if we do. But the thing that I was absolutely expecting seems to be pretty clearly stated, that it is not treated just like an additional Sonos speaker in the Sonos app, meaning that you can't just group it with other Sonos speakers and have it also simultaneously play through the headphones.
Yeah, why would you want to do that? Bro?
Specifically says that it doesn't do that, and then they very clearly mention that it detects if you've got them on or have taken them off, and will automatically switch between a Sonos Arc soundbar and the Sonos Ace headphones, meaning it silences the soundbar when you put the headphones on.
Phenomenal for the other people in the room, for those of you that have members of the family that are maybe having a hard time hearing things.
Yeah,
and
there's no mention.
Put on the headphones.
There's no mention of it playing with
simultaneously
the soundbar again, because they don't group things together as if it were just another Sonos speaker, which was entirely the thing I was expecting, because, one of the issues with wearing...
Who else is buying this crap other than people who have enough money to pay for it, number one, and then might actually use it in a way where they specifically made it not to work? The thing
that's great about Sonos is being able to coordinate all the speakers throughout your house so that they're all playing simultaneously and don't have weird echoes because one of them is lagging a little behind the other. And I thought, that's going to be a fantastic feature for headphones, even though they're going to be overly expensive, which they are. But I was like, that's going to be a really useful thing. You'll be able to use a Sonos sound system and then also have the headphones on, and it'll be perfectly synchronized. You won't have any weird echo effects as you hear a little bit of the sound that's coming from the speakers making its way through the headphones. There seems to be no mention of that. They only mention switching and automatically muting one when the other one goes on. And so I'm not going to completely knock it yet because I haven't read all the details. But on first glance, I'm like, that's weird. That's a weird thing to not have be kind of the major feature that sets these things apart. Okay, so not prepared to get into all of that, but this is AVRant. We'll get into our regular podcast. But I couldn't, if we didn't mention it, people were like, why were you talking about the Sonos headphones? It was the big news this week, and it's because it just officially got announced the moment we started.
Tuesdays. Will you people just understand that time is linear for human beings, and that
cannot be done? It's an impossibility, Tom. We have to live in the real world.
My favorite is when they dig up old videos. We're almost 1,000 episodes. They'll go back to 452. You guys don't know what the hell you're talking about. Okay.
It's true.
Yes. Back then, what you're saying... what you're saying that is true now, it was not true back then.
They found it now, so that means that's when it exists.
That's right.
That's how it works. Okay.
That's right. The whole world needs some emotional intelligence training, as far as I'm concerned. At least all of America. I don't know about the rest of the world. I can't speak to you people. I haven't met every one of you, but I've met enough Americans that I feel like I have a large enough sample size to say, as a whole, we need some emotional intelligence training because we are not getting it. So we're recording late today.
A little bit.
So things will be, who knows how things will go.
Right.
I haven't eaten lunch, haven't eaten anything, and it's almost lunchtime.
Extra grumpy, Tom.
Well, I don't know if I'll get grumpy as much as I'll start getting a headache. Yes, and then I will.
That'll make you grumpy. Yeah.
The headache will make me grumpy.
Right.
But then I'll also be like, okay, we're done with this nonsense. I'm going to go eat something. My wife is out of town. It's her birthday today. Happy birthday to my wife
happy
who's not
birthday.
listening to this podcast. And she is not listening. She has never listened to this podcast, and this podcast will be no different.
Okay.
But it is her birthday today, and she is out of town with my son, who is at college orientation. So I've got the whole house to myself, except for my other two sons, who are really harsh in my vibe here. really wish they would go someplace else, but they won't. They're buttheads. But yes, it is. We were trying to take it easy here. I got a toilet fix today. It was very exciting for me.
That's why we're starting just a little bit late.
That's why we're starting a little bit late.
That is an important priority.
Rob wants to talk about all this crap he watched, and I just want to say before Rob talks about his nonsense, of which will be, I'm sure, brief and not at all filled with the names of people, based on the notes the paragraph full of notes. In case I wanted to remember
somebody, I wrote it down to remind myself. That's all that's there for, Tom. I don't have a paragraph.
I have been watching The Good Place still. I think I'm on season 4, which is the last season. We're getting, and first of all, I remember it a little bit different than I'm seeing it now. I remember that I thought that they were, it was really feeling like, to me, I was like, oh, they keep, they're running out of ideas, so they kind of keep doing things. It feels much more, to me, this on the second watch, much more organic how things are working out to me. And not only that, the fact that I'm watching it by myself means I can pause.
Yes.
And read the newspaper, like the stuff in the background.
I see, yes. Oh, and they did put effort into everything. Was fully written out. It wasn't just gibberish or anything.
When they go to Jacksonville, in Arizona, and stop at a restaurant, you must pause, or anywhere they're at, you must pause. I mean, the stuff they say is hilarious. It's they're in Arizona and they're like, "Oh, you want me to go grab a Bible?" It's the only book in the the family section or something like that. Or it's just nonstop quips like that. But if you stop and you read the stuff that's the name of the high schools, the name of the airport in Jacksonville is just but the menus. Oh my God, menus and newspapers are just the best. It's not this show. Got to be the best show that I've ever seen. It's so deep and good. It's so amazing.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
The funny thing, I think one of the funnier things is that when Kristen Bell's character Eleanor gets back to Earth finally, and that's a spoiler alert, I guess, for somebody who hasn't seen the show. When she gets back to Earth, and now she can curse as much as she wants to. She immediately stops cursing. She doesn't curse.
It was network TV.
It was network TV, and I know that's why they did that. But at the same time, I think it's so in character for her to go, wait, I can't curse? Well, I'm going to do it as much as I can until I can figure out that I can. And then now that I can, I don't really want to anymore. It's so in character. So yes, loving the show. If you haven't seen it, for the love of God, watch this show. It is so good. All right. And I hope that I never find out something bad about things that happened on the show.
I don't think that one had anything like that I ever recall taking place.
All right, you go ahead and start talking about your stuff, because I think somebody's here.
Okay, here I go then. So yes, I will just say, Tom won't care about this. NHL playoffs, it is the end of the second round now. The Vancouver Canucks, whom I cheer for, they were eliminated, unfortunately. Edmonton Oilers got the best of them in a 7-game series, went to the max, came down to a single goal. They just about tied it back up and forced it to overtime there, but that's too bad. The team I cheer for will not win the Stanley Cup this year. Who knows if the Canucks will ever win a Stanley Cup in my lifetime, but not going to happen this year. But huge kudos to them. Nobody was expecting them to do this well this season, so we're ahead of the game, and we got some good prospects coming up. So here's hoping that next year goes even better. So, that was the end of that tale as far as that goes, but we'll see who ends up winning the Stanley Cup. I still predict the New York Rangers will do so. And then we finished up X-Men 97, the first season. There were 10 episodes, including the final 3 episodes were parts 1, 2, and 3 of a single arc that was going on there. Tom, have you caught up with X-Men 97? Or
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
I just want to say that if my son gets fired on the second day of work because he's an idiot, I'm going to be furious. I'm going to be absolutely furious.
Okay.
He forgot his lunch, and then so he's got to go to school in the morning and then work in the afternoon.
Sure.
And he came all the way back from school to grab his lunch and then go to work, which he'll now be late for, I think.
Gotcha.
And if he gets fired because of that, I'm just like, dude, why didn't you just buy lunch? Why didn't you just stop someplace and buy some? He is adult. Mm-hmm. He is technically an adult. He is going to be 21 this summer.
Yep.
I mean, I shouldn't. Those of you who are parents, you understand what I'm talking about. And I'm sure our parents felt the same way about the stupid stuff we did, but we don't remember it because we're old now and we only remember other people's bad things, not the bad things that we did. But holy crap, he is 20. Like, just buy lunch. How hard is that?
Things are different now,
Rob,
Tom.
go ahead.
A lot of workplace stuff has changed from when we were coming up, and looking after yourself is more important than being there on time. That's pretty common.
The most Canadian thing you've ever said. Shut up.
No, that's a Gen Z thing. But
Might be.
Back to X-Men 97. Just going to say episode 5 absolutely was the high point. I predicted we wouldn't maintain that or get back to that high, and I was absolutely correct about that. And very, very clear that, if there was any question, it's pretty darn clear Magneto is the writer's favorite character because he would drop in the lines that the very memorable stuff going on with everything with Magneto this season. So I highly recommend it, but they definitely were speed running through a lot of things, but they've set themselves up for an interesting season 2, and very much sticking to comic book stories that already existed, but doing their own little twists on them, and gave us a little fake out on the villain we might have expected setting up for season 2, because with everything the way that it played out in the finale, we're like, oh, I know who's coming, I know which villain is on his way, and then they did a little fake out, so we'll see what they twist around with that in season 2. But yeah, highly recommended there. So a couple of movies that I watched this week. I saw the streaming versions now that they're available. Actually, this one is the only one that is fairly new. The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Okay. This is a prequel to the Hunger Games, I guess, quadrilogy as far as movies
reviews,
go.
I'll be honest with you.
What's that?
I don't remember this getting great reviews. So let's see.
So this is kind of why I want to talk about it. This was considerably better than I was expecting. I really quite strongly like this movie. It was a little bit tough for me to decide, like if I were recommending someone who's never seen any of the Hunger Games before. Since this is a prequel, and since the main character that we're following, played by Tom Blythe, we know, where he ends up in the other Hunger Games movies. This is taking place 64 years before the Hunger Games movies with Jennifer Lawrence in them. So this is quite a ways back, and this is like the 10th Hunger Games that we're seeing, and the original Hunger Games movie was the 74th. So that's how we know what's going on there. But yeah, since we already know the outcome of the main character, 64 years from now, I was like, it would be kind of interesting to watch this prequel first without any knowledge or context of what's going to happen, and just, see his arc play out without knowing where he's going to end up in this prequel movie. But at the same time, it would be really difficult to watch this movie without having seen any of the Hunger Games movies first, because they don't take time to explain the Hunger Games. They're like, we already did that in the other movies, and so we're just going to plop you right into this prequel and expect that you understand, kind of what's happened with this world and what the Hunger Games are, because otherwise it'll be, I would think, kind of jarring and confusing. I mean, you could get it from seeing it play out, but it wouldn't really be clear exactly, how these games work or what's going on with it. So I do think you sort of need to watch it in release release order. That's where I've landed on that ultimately. But Rachel Ziegler, she's the female lead in this. She is fantastic, and they let her sing many songs in this, which is certainly her strong suit. She has an absolutely fantastic voice. Saw her in West Side Story first, and she blew me away with her singing in that. So glad that they do allow her to be the songbird, the titular songbird in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And then other great performers in this: Peter Dinklage, Viola Davis. Really standout performances in this. Peter Dinklage doesn't have a ton of lines, but holy cow, that man can act. I mean, really gives you the pathos and the gravitas of everything that's going on in that person's mind. So, and Viola Davis as sort of the only really over the top villain in this, chewing up the scenery but doing it immaculately well. So I love the performances in this. The one character that I really wanted to comment on, a character by the name of Sejanus, since they use a lot of Roman names in the Hunger Games, played by Josh Rivera. His performance and just his look and his mannerisms and the way that he moves his mouth and the way that he delivers his lines, he was so reminiscent of Philip Seymour Hoffman in this movie that I was sure, since I hadn't read the book that this is based on, I was sure that, he must be like the father of Philip Seymour Hoffman's character in the Hunger Games movies, or he must be related to him in some way, or I was like, is that actually him? Like, does he just change his name later on? And because everybody in the Hunger Games who lives in the capital, they look younger than they are. That's one of the things that they talk about, since they have so much money and so much technology, that they look younger than they are. I was like, is that him? And he just changed his name, or is that his father? What's going on? They aren't related. I couldn't believe it. I was like, why did they go for someone who's so reminiscent of Philip Seymour Hoffman in his performance? I was like, right. It threw me. I was like, how could they not be? It seems like they absolutely must be. But I loved his performance nonetheless. I felt it really was really compelling. So I give a big thumbs up to this. It was much better than I was expecting it to be. I thought the third act, sort of the finale of Tom Blythe's main character's arc, was a little bit rushed to me, even though this is like a 2.5 hour long movie. I felt that the third act felt a little bit rushed, that he finishes up his arc in a way that I was like, I felt like it needed a little bit more breathing room, which the book allows. But overall, pleasantly surprised by that. And then, watch one more movie that I do want to talk about. I don't want to belabor this section too much longer, but Asteroid City, which includes quotation marks around that title. In the title, Asteroid City is within quotation marks. This is a Wes Anderson movie, and so it has a Wes Anderson style. That
aesthetic, yes.
Yeah, beautiful colors in this. So, on a technical level, it really is nice to watch this on a really good HDR display, because he makes use of the colors, doing the Wes Anderson thing, changing the aspect ratio frequently, although predominantly just between 4:3 and CinemaScope, although he sometimes puts a 4:3 window inside of the height of a CinemaScope and then expands it and then goes, the height is above CinemaScope. So if you're watching this on a scope screen, you will either be cropping or having to have an outboard scaler fit this inside, because he does make 4:3 sections that are taller than the CinemaScope, and really seems to be formatted for a 16:9 screen on the technical side of things. Almost entirely 90-degree camera movements, so everything either tracks directly left or right or moves directly up and down. There's no tilting, there's no panning, it's just like direct left, right, up, down movements, so quite distinct in that way. So I don't want to give too much away, but it's very obvious from the beginning. This is a play within a play that we're viewing. So we have a narrator who's telling us about the writer of the play, and we see some of those things being performed out by Edward Norton, who is the playwright, and then Asteroid City that we're watching as a movie is the play that he wrote. So we're flipping back and forth between seeing the writer and seeing the play that he wrote, but we're viewing it not as a stage play, but as a movie. And then we are also seeing the actors be the actors outside of the movie, and then, of course, be the characters that are within the play that are part of the movie. So that's sort of the narrative construct that's going on here. Jason Schwartzman, he's the lead. He is fantastic in this. Might be my favorite performance that I've seen from Jason Schwartzman. He's not always the lead. He often plays supporting characters. I felt, giving him the lead, letting him really chew on this. He absolutely stepped up to the plate. Scarlett Johansson's fantastic fantastic in this. Tom Hanks is more of a supporting player. Bryan Cranston is the narrator. So, got you heavy hitters as Wes Anderson always gets. And then there's a ton of other names with like single scenes. You'll notice these actors. There's all very famous actors who all want to be in Wes Anderson's movies. So no surprise there. But I think this might be one of the most accessible Wes Anderson movies that there's been. I think this might be one of the most poignant, one of the most actually does have a point to say. He leaves it open because he celebrates art and he celebrates that everybody has their own interpretation of what art is, and that's kind of what the movie is about the healing ability of art itself, of how art mixes into real life, of how real life informs performers as they're giving a performance, and how as a stage play goes on in its run, what's going on in an actor's life might change the way that they feel about the performance that they're giving. All of that is subtext. None of that is overtly spoken out loud, but this is a movie about grief and about dealing with grief that's taking place both inside of the play that we're witnessing and in the real lives of the actors outside of the play. And I thought it was fantastic. It's funny throughout. It doesn't get heavy about any of it. It's a very humorous movie. I was laughing out loud at many points, but it is poignant at the same time, and so I'm really quite thrilled by it. A lot of Wes Anderson movies, people get to the end of it and they're kind of like, what was the point of that? Which he actually has characters in this movie asking out loud because they're wondering what is the point of everything that's going on, both inside the play and in their own lives. But so he's sort of being meta about it. He understands that people ask that about his own movies, and that's why I think this might be the most accessible, the most direct story that he's told, and I really, really liked it. So yeah, huge thumbs up to everything I watched this week. Hooray!
Oh, good. Okay, we're done.
Tom was enraptured.
Again, brief. I was not paying attention.
I
I'm
know.
sorry. I was requesting products for review. That's what I was doing while you were talking. I heard Wes Anderson and a couple of...
And you tuned right out, which is a shame.
It says, I'm sure it was fascinating listening for everybody.
I think so.
I mean, I was listening. Come on. Guys, I'm just giving them a hard time. So this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website, find our show notes, our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures of which we are speaking. Also, our audio is there, so you can just listen to it right there on the website. Find our older episodes, all 913 of them. If you really want to go back in time and see how wrong I was about things in the past, and then hopefully I'm righter now than I was before. If you want to find us on Facebook.com/AVRant Podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where our live recording sessions are posted.
Mm-hmm.
Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His social media is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. And thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and send us a PayPal donation. And we want to thank Raf for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Raf.
Yeah, Raf, thank you for your PayPal donation. Really appreciate your financial support.
You want to support us monthly and not have to think about it? You can sign up to be one of our patrons over at patreon.com/AVRantPodcast. 133 patrons right now, so thank all of you.
Yes, indeed. That is patreon.com/AVRantPodcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 133 patrons who are doing that right now.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through whatever's happening this week. Mohsen, he says he's a big fan and watched almost every week. Watched, which is brave. Adam, who says he loves recommending our podcast to his friends who are getting home theaters or media room set up. And Joe. So thank you, Mohsen, Adam, and Joe.
That's right. I'll repeat the names one more time since it's not even a very long list this week. Mohsen, Adam, and Joe, thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We certainly appreciate it. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
In the news, last week I actually talked to Rob about this after the podcast because I had written the article but hadn't published it yet. So it was about Onkyo and Integra's newest 2-channel stereo receivers, the Onkyo TX-8470 and the Integra DTM-7.4. They pack some surprises, particularly the Integra, when it comes to features and price. So let's discuss my take on that when I posted over there at AV Gadgets. The big thing well, there's actually a couple of big things.
There's a couple of big things, yeah.
The first thing is it's surprising parity in pricing. Okay. It's $799 for the Onkyo and $900 for the Integra, which I kept going back and double checking.
That's right.
Like,
because normally we expect it to be a bigger price delta.
It was like $101.
That's right.
Let's call it $100. $100 difference between these two is really sort of insanely close.
Yeah.
For what we would expect.
Almost to the point of like, do we need two separate models from two separate brands? But it is $100 is $100.
So yes, if you're really trying to save $100, you can do that. So the big thing here is that obviously the Integra version is meant more for the custom installer market, right, and the Onkyo version is for the consumer market.
And on the back panel, there's the evidence of that we would expect to see. The Onkyo is pretty straightforward. Right. You'll notice that there's 4 pairs of binding posts, even though this is a stereo amp, but that's because we do have A and B choice between speakers, but there are only 2 amplifiers built inside this thing, so you're not going to be using like 2 separate sources simultaneously to play through 2 separate things, but it does have pre-outs for a Zone 2, which is kind of surprising for a 2-channel AV receiver. Don't always expect there to be a Zone 2 function going on with that. And pre-outs. You've got pre-outs for the left and rights, as well as a subwoofer pre-out. So there is bass management on board. There are pre-outs in case you want to connect an external amplifier. These are how many watts per channel built in? I'm forgetting what it was. I think it was 80. 80, that sounds right.
Does that sound right?
And you do have HDMI inputs on this, including the 4 inputs are HDMI 2.1. They'll pass through 4K 120. They'll do that. There is a single HDMI output. And they do
110 watts. Sorry, 110.
Okay. Oh, that's more than I thought. But yeah, the output, that HDMI output 2.1, it is ARC on there, and as Tom points out astutely in his article, like, why isn't it eARC? What happened to eARC? It's like, well, when it's 2 channels. What do you need eARC for? You can do completely lossless 2-channel PCM through regular ARC or through an optical port, and that's the most this is going to do. There's no surround sound processing going on in this 2-channel receiver, so regular HDMI ARC is perfectly suitable. But over on the Integra version of this, we've got an RS-232 port that isn't present on the Onkyo. We've got trigger outputs, IR in and out, for those integrators who want to use this in an integrated system. But that's kind of about it as far as physical connections. Both of them have a dedicated phono input with a ground pin.
I think there's an extra button on the front of the Integra that allows you to press it and it'll show you the IP address on the front. So
yes, like, okay. Well, that's
which is nice for custom installers, but certainly not something.
You don't
one of the things you might notice is that
on-screen menu to get that information. Yeah, it's nice.
That's right. One of the things you might notice is that the power supply, they talk about the amplification is class G.
Right.
Like what's class G? The simple version for those of you that don't have these things memorized, like me, and I had to go look it up, is that there are 2 power supplies inside here. There's a low power supply and a high power supply. So when the amplifier needs to pump out, most of the time it's pumping out very few watts.
That's right.
You use the low power supply. What does this do for you? Heat and efficiency, basically. So if you see a lot of the pictures, and I don't think the ones that I posted in here show this, but the pictures that you'll see of these units, a lot of times they're shoved inside something.
Okay.
They are
like the
inside of
images.
Yeah, the marketing images. These are all stuff. So, sometimes they do that anyways, even though they shouldn't. But the idea here is that when you're more efficient, you're giving off less heat.
Yeah.
So if you're in most of the time putting out just a handful of watts or maybe a dozen watts, you don't need to be using that huge power supply, which is putting off up to 50% heat, like a Class AB. This is very much, and the Class G is basically Class AB, but with 2 different power supplies for 2 different modes.
Yeah.
And so you get that same dynamics and everything else that you would expect from a Class AB, same linearity that you would get from a Class AB, but when it's in low power mode, when you're not needing a lot of power, you use the more efficient, lower power supply so that you are not generating a bunch of heat that you don't need. I think it's a great idea.
It makes a heck of a lot of sense. Yeah. But then beyond what we can see visually as the obvious external differences that are going on here, Tom, discovered that there's quite a bit more going on under the hood when it comes to that Integra.
And I can't believe they're not really like
jacking up the price,
pushing this. I mean, jacking up the price and pushing this more because, geez, they have an onboard diagnostics tool that has test patterns, and plus they have EDID and HDCP adjustment. So
that's
you
huge. That is huge.
You can actually control the HDMI handshake. Well, you can't, but custom installers can.
Right.
Control can like lock in the EDID so that a lot of the problems that you might have with in theory at least, no one's tested this yet,
right?
You could maybe solve a lot of these problems that you see with things powering off, things powering on, doing all these other stuff. You have really granular control of this receiver. There's discrete commands for almost, what did they say here? Discrete commands for virtually any AVR function.
That's right.
Any function. Discrete commands, like custom installers, just all as a group went. Oh.
That's right. You mean I don't have to program press menu this many times down on the down arrow, pause, enter, pause again, back, structuring things so that you're creating a macro to go through a menu like we're so used to having to do. It's just like, just a discrete command for the thing I want to turn on or off or go through the various toggle settings. Yes, what a wonderful thing for when you're trying to create macros inside of, a custom installed, infrared or over the network command, the tablet or whatever it is that you're using in your whole house system there. There's another part of it too, when it came to that EDID thing, because we've had people ask us multiple times, like, okay, we know there's HD Fury devices out there or some of the less expensive devices from other brands that are just like, okay, we can memorize the EDID from a television so that we don't have as many of these handshaking issues when the power goes out or I plug in a new source or whatever it might be and everything resets itself. It's like, why don't AV receiver manufacturers just include that in the AV receivers? And we've always said it's a cost benefit ratio, how many people are going to use it versus how much cost is it to include that. Well, about $100, I guess, is the answer to that, because Integra's done it.
I can't understand how they've done this.
Yeah.
So,
but
we'll see what it actually, when it rolls out
in practice.
Yeah, in use, how much control they actually have, because I'm surprised they've got it. But if they start integrating this into this 2-channel receiver, you can bet that they're going to roll it out to the higher
the exciting
end.
Part. It's the anticipation of our immersive audio surround sound AV receivers getting functionality like this. I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be any different, where the Onkyo and Pioneer versions probably won't have it, and it'll be reserved for the Integra, which in the case of surround sound and immersive audio receivers, it's more than $100 difference. But we've seen in the last round of flagships that came out, again, it wasn't as great a price delta as we might have expected getting the Integra versus the Onkyo or the Pioneer models in between. So this is we're anticipating, and maybe we shouldn't get overly excited, because we always warn people, don't count on anything that doesn't exist the moment that you buy it. If it's promised as a firmware update or a future feature, don't count on it. But this is kind of like all the evidence is there that it would be kind of weird if this didn't show up in future surround sound models.
And even with the Onkyo versions, they could, in theory, give you some sort of drop-down menu or something that would allow you to have some sort of EDID control.
That might be a bridge too far to ask for and hope for, Tom.
It might be, but you know what I mean? I mean, that's what we're kind of hoping, towards that direction.
Right,
so that,
right.
Because HDMI is not working. It's just not. Right? This whole idea that everything's going to work together, HDMI has not exerted enough control over manufacturers, and either by choice or because they just can't. They have not exerted enough force to get manufacturers to make sure that their products work together. So if you can't do that, if you're not going to do it, or if you can't do it, then at least give us the control so that we can do it.
But just to temper expectations a little bit, I do want to point out, of course, on the back of this Integra 2-channel DTM-7.4, it is a single HDMI output. We are talking about a switch, 4 in, 1 out, which is relatively simple in the HDMI world because, of course, most of the higher-end surround sound and immersive audio receivers have 2 or 3 HDMI outputs, which means you might very well be connecting to 2 very disparate, different displays with completely different EDID signals that are going back there. We know that is responsible for many of the problems that people end up asking about on this podcast. So whether the features the adjustability inside of the network accessible menu for this Integra 2 channel with a single HDMI output, whether they really are going to be able to expand that to take care of multiple HDMI outputs on future models. We certainly can't make that promise on their behalf. So I want to temper that a little bit. If this doesn't show up, I wouldn't be the shock of shocks because they might be like, well, there's just no way to get it to work with a matrix switch. we could do it with a 4 in 1 out, but not with a 8 in 3 out. It just got a little bit too difficult there. So, we'll see what goes on, but kind of fingers crossed for the future. It's a good sign.
Yeah, it was very exciting.
Yeah,
it's very exciting. And also unexpected, and it was kind of just buried in a list.
Well, because I guess they're figuring like consumers won't care about it, but integrators will, and they'll find it.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I was excited by it. All right, we already mentioned the plans that were announced by Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery to offer a streaming bundle of Disney Plus, Hulu, and Max this summer. Not to be outdone, Comcast announced that by the end of the month. Comcast Internet customers will be able to subscribe to a new StreamSaver bundle that will include Peacock, of course, because that's Comcast, Netflix, and Apple TV Plus at a vastly reduced price, although the exact price wasn't given.
Yeah, it's coming out this month, and they still couldn't announce the price. I don't know what they're waiting for.
Apple's still saying, but we getting ours, right?
Yeah, right.
Y'all can reduce the price as much as you want, but we getting ours. If you individually signed up for ad-supported Peacock and Netflix plus the only available tier of Apple TV Plus, that combo will cost you $22.97 a month, and to go ad-free will cost you $39.47. So the new StreamSaver bundle will supposedly be vastly reduced compared to those, assuming it comes in both ad-supported and ad-free options. Comcast CEO outright said they hope to take dollars away from competing streaming services by adding value for their customers. If this is all sounding like we're right back to cable TV prices, it's kind of where this is all going. I hate to say it, but I don't hate to say it.
A Comcast executive came up with the idea of bundling channels together.
It's that kind of out of the box thinking, son. You're gonna go places. You're gonna go places in this organization.
Yeah, if I had to predict, I'd say it's probably going to be $7 off of the individual prices. Because that would mean
Peacock version, the Peacock price.
Yeah, that's the price of Peacock. So I mean, it would make like Apple, they're not going to give a discount to Comcast. Netflix, they're not going to give a discount to Comcast. So take those two prices, add them together, and then throw in Peacock for free. That would be vastly reduced in a CEO's mind. So I'm predicting that's the price. Subtract $7 or just take the prices of Apple TV Plus and Netflix, add them together, and that'll be the price. That's my prediction anyway. We'll see if I'm right or wrong once they finally announce the price. You would think before the end of the month, since that's apparently when this is launching. But there you go. Yeah, it's going to be a battle of bundles, right? That's what we're looking at in the future. Instead of all these completely individual streaming services, it's going to be a battle of bundles. Hooray.
All right, I guess we have even more news about this. We still don't have a price or launch date or even regulatory approval for the proposed streaming sports bundle of ESPN, Fox Sports, and Warner Brothers Discovery that was announced back in February, but we do have a name and a website now, Venu. Venu?
I mean, they say to just pronounce it as Venu, but of course they had to make it a weird spelling so that they'd have the search engine optimization.
Sounds a lot like Temu. It looks like in my mind, I look at it as Temu. Yeah, I'm just like, I don't know if I would have gone with that.
Anyway, it's Venu. I mean, people were jokingly calling it Spoolu when it didn't have an official name because it's Sports Hulu, but they decided on Venu instead. Not that far off.
The website outright says that the launch of the service is conditional upon receiving regulatory approval, which is being contested by existing sports streaming services like Fubo TV, Fubo, whatever. So we'll find out if Venu actually sees the light of day, no one cares. I mean, somebody cares. I
Oh,
don't care.
people care. People care. I mean,
Yes.
but yeah, we're just seeing, we're seeing the bundling and fighting of streaming services pretty similar to how TV station stuff all went down. So, yeah, there we go. Everything old is new again.
LG's $100,000 65-inch Signature OLED R, or as Rob likes to call it, the Rolled, has been discontinued. The rollable OLED TV that could disappear into its stand made a lot of headlines when it was shown at CES back in 2021. And for a while, if you wanted to spend $100,000, you could actually order one. But they're no longer for sale. And LG has reportedly repurposed that manufacturing line entirely, so it won't be coming back anytime soon because it was dumb. No offense. But this is dumb. That's dumb. I mean, there's like 5 people in the world who are like, I will build an entire house around this stupid TV.
Or at least
and those people got it, and now they're done.
Yeah,
seems like if you want an invisible TV, you'll just settle for LG's transparent OLED T out now, or you could just have a TV on your wall like a normal person. Stop being weird about it.
People don't want to notice that the TV's on there. I think Hisense's Canvas TV has a much bigger chance of success.
I think so too. I agree. I am not sitting on this chair properly. It's messing with my back.
Yeah.
Comments from our listeners, Kevin and Mike. I guess they are a couple, maybe? I don't know.
Just 2 people who wrote in about the same thing. Since you asked for it, Tom.
Yeah. So far, we have not been flooded with a bunch of numbers in response to Tom's mysterious "how much do regular people pay for a TV?" questions. Got a couple of responses. Kevin thinks $1,000, and Mike immediately thought $600, just like Rob, right before Rob said it last week. My wife thinks $1,000 too.
Oh, wow.
Okay. That's what she thinks is a reasonable price for a TV. Or like on the high side.
You paid more than that for your 83-inch OLED.
I did.
Yeah.
And she is not happy about it. To be honest about it. I don't know if I'm ever getting another gift.
It is a gorgeous TV, though. There's no disputing that. It is
very nice. She was very happy with it. And now she's like...
But that price tag,
brings it up when she's mad at me.
I still don't know why that was a question that you threw out there, sans context, but it is. We've had a couple responses.
The reason this is because she's claiming a certain amount of it on her taxes, I think.
I see.
And that's how it came to my mind.
Okay.
Jay, so 3D TVs are a thing of the past, and now finding 3D Blu-rays to purchase is becoming more and more difficult.
It is.
Poor Jay and Rob.
That's right.
Random Space Media in Australia was keeping 3D Blu-rays alive, including movie titles that couldn't be found in 3D anywhere else, but now they've closed down. But in their absence, Turbine Media in Germany has stepped up to the plate and announced 3D Blu-ray releases of Jurassic World Dominion? Whatever. That movie no one saw? Because everyone knew what the plot was, and it was just the same one as before. Minions: The Rise of Gru, which I think that my like 18-year-old son saw as a joke. I think they all went to it because it was
the whole dressing up thing. Yeah.
And The Bad Guys, which are otherwise unavailable from any other publisher, and they aren't skimping out. All 3 releases include both English and German Dolby Atmos soundtracks, and they've made sure these 3D Blu-rays are region-free, which I thought was the case anyway.
No, that's Ultra HD Blu-rays are region-free. Regular Blu-rays still had the regions, but they can be made region-free, so they did.
So if you're willing to import them, they'll play anywhere in the world at least. 3D ain't dead yet. I said just like the Black Knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail. It's merely a flesh wound. So
yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to say it, Jay, but even I have stopped purchasing 3D Blu-rays. The juice is not worth the squeeze anymore. I've taken my Z9D out of my home theater and put that 77-inch G3 OLED in there in its place, and so I still have ways of watching 3D. I haven't entirely given up on methods of being able to watch 3D movies in my home because I do have my 3D collection, but even I'm kind of giving up the ghost on that one. Even as the Apple Vision Pro supposedly is the new home for 3D releases if you want to pay $3,500 for a augmented reality headset. But there it is. Sorry, Jay. Even I might not be entirely on board with this anymore. Hang my head.
Might be able to get an Apple Pro head, whatever. I already forgot the name of it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I already forgot the name. You can get one of those. on Facebook Marketplace for almost nothing.
Oh, right. People are getting rid of them. That's true.
There's a Tesla Cybertruck on my Facebook Marketplace local feed thing. Somebody keeps reducing the price. It's come down quite a few times since it was a lot. I think it was like 179,000 when it was up there. It's now down to like 139 maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I think they cost like $200,000.
I don't think it's quite that much. Well, maybe if it's fully tricked out, probably, yeah.
I don't know.
Not going to get into that.
It's
question time.
Dan's got a question. He says, let's say that gaming isn't a priority at all. Mm-hmm. Welcome to my world. If you just want to watch movies in HDR, what would we say is the very best value pick for a 75-inch LCD TV right now? It's got to be LCD.
Well, I mean, he put that in there. But, 75-inch, that's the main thing I'm looking at. Size, what's the very best value?
We were looking at that for that range, 77 to 83 for me.
Yeah.
And we looked at the C2, C3
OLEDs, though.
Range, OLEDs. Yes. Yeah, which were, I think, pretty competitively priced. You can get really cheap LCD TVs. I see them all the time. It's just a matter of performance-wise, because he just says in HDR. He doesn't say HDR with good black levels. He just says HDR.
No,
right?
Yes, we're going to read between the lines a little bit here and assume that what he's looking for is very good performance, not a gigantic compromise, that the purpose of this is to watch movies. He wants the impact of HDR, but what is value? So of course, my definition of value might be a little bit different than other people's, but I am looking for a bang for a buck. I'm looking for let's say the fewest compromises per dollar saved would be another way to go at it, right? So I personally think that if the utmost image quality is really the most important factor, I still want to include OLEDs in this list because I do think I can absolutely make a compelling argument for saying that a 77-inch B3 OLED from LG, which is on clearance these days since the B4 and the C4 and the G4 are reaching store shelves now. And I would not call any of those the best value at this moment because the difference from the 3s to the 4s is not so gigantic that I think it's worth paying multiple hundreds of dollars to get the newest one. So I think a B3, which is the least expensive LG OLED that you can get in the 77-inch size, $1,800 on sale right now as we're recording this, I can definitely make an argument for that being the highest value 75 or 77-inch TV that you can get for movie watching. It isn't the epitome of a gaming powerhouse. It still has two HDMI 2.1 inputs that can support 4K 120, so it's not like it's a slouch at gaming, but it doesn't have four HDMI 2.1 inputs, and it doesn't do 144 hertz. It stops at 120, but it'll still do Dolby Vision at 120 hertz with VRR, so it's not a slouch for gaming, but it isn't the very brightest TV. Other OLEDs are brighter than it. LCDs are definitely brighter, but when it comes to contrast, nothing beats OLED having that perfect black level and having the intra-scene perfect black, a black pixel next to the brightest white pixel, and they really are that. There's no bleeding over from one to the other on an OLED, and you can have that pixel perfect contrast. So $1,800 for a B3, I don't really think can be beat if you want the absolute best performance without spending any extra than you need to. I can also say, if you're maybe in a room that isn't, really, really dim or perfectly pitch black, and you still want to get an OLED, but you want a little bit more light output than the B3 can muster up, Samsung's QD OLEDs, the S89C and the S90C, they're on clearance because the D, the 90D and 95D have just come out, and I wouldn't go for those right now necessarily for value. The 89C and the 90C and the 77-inch size are $2,200 now. That's a chunk of change over the B3. Sticking with OLED, it happens to be the C3s from LG are also at $2,200 on clearance right now. But I would actually give the edge in picture performance to the S90C or the S89C, which honestly are identical, other than the stand that they come with from Samsung. They are brighter than either the B3 or the C3. The color volume is higher because there is no white subpixel, but they lack Dolby Vision, So if that's really important to you, they don't have that, and they cost more. But I can make an argument for them being a super high value now too. So then let's say, okay, all of those are just too expensive. Can I get something at 75 inches for less that, Rob would still say is a good value? And absolutely you can. And of course, we are getting to LCDs now. I can definitely make an argument, especially if you just want maximum light output for HDR highlights, a TCL QM8. And this would be the 2023 version. So that would be a QM850. Because, of course, in 2024, there is a QM851 that replaces it. But I wouldn't get that. I would get the QM850, $1,200 right now, right? So we've got something that is definitely beating the B3 on price. It is crazy bright. And full array local dimming, mini LED backlights, a very, very impressive television. I would choose TCL's QM850 over the exact same priced Hisense U8K. I think the QM8 is the way to go there, and there's no difference in price, so that's the easy one there. If you're like, well, I want to go even less expensive than that, I can make an argument for the TCL Q7, again, 50, denoting 2023, or the Hisense U7K. Same price at $900 each right now, right? So if you're just like, the thing that denotes value in my mind is getting a TV for less than $1,000, because everything else I've talked about is over $1,000. The U7K from Hisense, the TCL Q7, $900 in the 75-inch size, still full array local dimming. So you're still getting pretty darn good contrast as far as LCD goes, but of course not as many zones as the QM8. Doesn't get as bright in those highlights. You're hitting around 1,000 or 1,200 nits in the HDR highlights, but that's still definitely HDR and still full array local dimming. There'll be some blooming on these TVs. If you have bright subtitles on a black background, there'll be some blooming around those letters. But value, right? If you're like, under $1,000 is what denotes value to me, I can make an argument for those. So only last thing I would say is you do have those brand new TCLs, the brand new Hisenses, so we're on to the 51s at the end of the model number for the TCLs, or an N as the letter at the end of the Hisenses, so they went from K to N for some reason, but that's what they did. I would say maybe the one I would pick out right this second, since they aren't really discounted because they're all brand new, TCL's QM751 at $1,500, right? So it's more than a QM8. But what TCL did this year is basically there was like the Q750 from 2023. The QM751 is a definite noticeable step up from the Q7 from last year. It is about 50% brighter. It has more local dimming zones, and it has mini LED backlights now, whereas the Q7 last year was regular LEDs. It didn't have the mini LEDs. It is almost up to the performance of last year's QM8, because this year's QM8, the QM851, which is over $2,000 and right up against an OLED, but it's claiming 5,000 nits, just like Hisense's brand new U9N series. So TCL budged everything up. They budged the performance up on everything that they did, whereas Hisense just introduced a new series above the U8 series to battle out TCL's QM851. But none of those, I would say, is really the highest values. So I think those are my picks, certainly right now, especially since we have the brand new models for 2024 coming out. It's a good time to buy a TV, Memorial Day sales, as we're talking. And those would be the ones I'd go for.
All right. Karl. As we know, for quite a while now, Karl and his wife E have been planning their Vanta Black Theater, and that will be built above a newly constructed, fully separate garage. Originally, their plans were hampered by some restrictive city building codes that would have forced their garage to be smaller than they wanted, but now those building codes have been changed. With more changes that would be favorable for what they want to build, potentially happening later this year. So with all that time on their hands, Karl has been considering other ideas for the new home theater, since they both enjoy sitting right up front and feeling the peripheral vision. When they go out to a movie theater, Karl has been intrigued by the idea of having an actual certified IMAX home theater. We might recall that IMAX announced their certified home theater plans several years ago, but they wound up suspending those plans, and now they aren't officially available anymore. Karl found an installer who used to do it, and they still have the plans and specs, which they shared so that Karl can compare them to what he was planning to build with his local installer. IMAX's original home cinema plans were based on room size. Karl and E's new room would fall within the prestige size, which is anywhere from 13 by 16.5 to 7.5, with just 3 seats and a 130-inch screen. That's just ridiculously large. With
It is IMAX.
Up to 18 feet by 23.5 by 10 feet with 9 total seats and a 180-inch screen. God dang, dude.
So in these ones, in this size, it's at most 2 rows of seats.
Yes.
So that's, like 5 seats in the back, pretty close to the back wall, honestly. 4 seats in the front. Always an acoustically transparent screen in these setups, so some amount of space is being taken up at the front of the room because the speakers are behind it, and they're not using in-walls. So it's like a false wall setup at the front.
The screen is always curved, acoustically transparent, which is micro-perforated, and in a 1.89 to 1 aspect ratio, making it a similar experience to digital IMAX theaters. The speakers are all highly sensitive, which is ludicrous when they're closer to you as they are, and expect to be able to sustain 105 dB at the seats with additional 6 dB of peak headroom available above that, which most speakers can do without being highly sensitive.
Not necessarily, because
depends on how far away you sit, Rob. Come on.
I know, but they aren't going for 85 sustained with 105 peaks. They're going for 105 sustained and 6 decibels above that for peaks.
It's just so overkill. No one's going to sit there and listen for multiple hours at a time, day after day after day.
You honestly
at that,
shouldn't.
At that volume
It is
level.
literally dangerous
safe
to your long-term hearing. Yeah.
If they're powered by a seemingly modest 125 watts per channel amp, which is why they have to be highly sensitive, whatever. Subs are expected to sustain 115 dB at the seats, and interestingly, the speakers are only designed to play down to 80 hertz, so bass management is fully intended in this system. Perhaps the most
IMAX,
obvious...
What a shock.
I know. Perhaps the most obvious difference is the mandate to use dual projectors, both are native 4K, Cinema 4K, which is 4096 by 2160 resolution with 4,000 to 1 native contrast, and the dual projector setup is there to boost light output up to the 30-foot Lamberts, about 100 nits, and to provide a single projector for each eye when showing 3D. Good Lord.
Yep.
Overkill. But this does not seem to be an HDR setup. Color is limited to BT 709, and frame rate tops out at 60 hertz with HDMI 2.0 inputs, no HDMI 2.1 here. So what are reactions, given that there's no way to get an official IMAX certified home theater built anymore? I mean, you'd be... Okay, whatever. Would we maybe borrow some, but not all of these specifications, rather than adhering strictly to what IMAX originally laid out? What do we think? Okay. I mean, honestly... Okay. I honestly believe that this sort of IMAX theater that you might get set up in your home is not really meant to be used. It's more like it's not even spinning rims on a car. It's like buying a car and putting it in the garage, and then people come over and you point at it and go, "Look at my nice car." That is the equivalent of this. You might ride in that car once a year. Or maybe twice a year during like parades or something like that, or when you're at a car show, you take it out and have it shipped there, and then it putters over at 2 miles an hour to the parking spot, and then it stays there. This is not a theater that is meant to be experienced regularly. It is a special event thing. It is, I have an IMAX theater. Let's go in there. We'll watch a few seconds while of the loudest scene of whatever. It'll be ludicrously loud, and then we will walk out and we will go back into the kitchen or the living area or the outside area or to my yacht and just hang out there and drink and talk about how cool my IMAX theater is. That you'll ask me how much I use it, and I'll go, "Oh yeah, we use it quite often." You'd be surprised how much we use it. No, you wouldn't. They don't use it. They never use it.
Karl and he honestly probably would.
That's what I'm saying.
Those two would, yeah.
The point is you want a usable home theater. This is paying for a theater that you will never use in the way that's intended. You won't want to sit in there and watch TV. You're not at the volume levels that this thing can achieve. You don't want things to wrap around you like this, like the curved screen and the size of the screen. It's overwhelming for long periods of time.
Karl and he kind of like that, though. That's their whole thing. I mean, they are distinctly different from Tom's taste and my taste, but they know that about themselves. They 100% are committed to it, and I have no problem with that. They know themselves and they know what they like.
So, okay. So the curved screen and all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, if you really want to do all of that, you can do it. I mean, the problem is to get that light output that you really want. Like, you're going for this all in perfect experience or whatever. I get the whole wraparound curved screen thing, and there's only gonna be two of you in there for the most part. You can set it up in such a way so that it's not so distorted when you're experiencing it. So that's the part I would take from this. If of all the things that they've done, the screen size in relation to you is maybe the thing. I would not do dual projectors. I would just get one good one.
Well, and also, it's not that I'm outright surprised, because this wasn't a little bit older spec. This wasn't completely up to date. So like HDMI 2.1 versus 2.0, not necessarily surprised there. I'm a little bit surprised there was no HDR allowance in this, though. That BT709 for the color, even though it can hit 100 nits when it's put together, that wasn't really intended for HDR purposes. That I'm a little bit surprised at. And if you were allocating the budget for the DLP projectors that they were talking about, because they say it's not even like DCI compliant projectors that they were going for, so they're not going for the wide color in here. If you allocated the price that they were looking at for that dual projection setup, you could be looking at something like a Sony GTZ380, that liquid crystal on silicon 4K resolution, 10,000 lumen projector, which is brighter than this combo. The screen sizes that you're talking about, but is fully HDR compliant and is HDMI 2.1, and it's like, okay, that's the type of thing that I might tweak this design to a more up-to-date, more capable, HDR capable, wide color capable, higher contrast projector. I don't think there's any world where I would tell you to strictly adhere to the specs that were given, because I think they're a little bit outdated, and I think that they were a little strangely under-specced to begin with. But I mean, it's because IMAX, like actual IMAX releases, are not HDR, right? You go to IMAX Cinema, that's not HDR. So it kind of makes sense that in the home version, they didn't even really consider it. But I'm like, we can do better. We can honestly do better at home for very similar price points, better capabilities, and more formats for, content that we can definitely access at home. We can have a lot of HDR content now with wide colors. So I don't think I would skimp there. I agree with Tom. Like, you might consider like, oh, you know what really stood out to me was that curved screen that I wasn't necessarily going to go for. There's no reason you can't have that with other projectors. There's absolutely no reason you can't do that. And we know Karl already owns a Mad VR video processor. So if there's any sort of pin cushioning effect or reverse pin cushioning effect going on because you went to a curved screen instead, it's like you can absolutely get around that with your Mad VR processor connected to a very capable HDR liquid crystal on silicon projector that you would get today. On the audio side of things, I mean, I agree with Tom. Like, there was no reason to go beyond. Like, you already picked out a focal, in-wall or on-wall system that you absolutely adored. And in the room sizes that you were considering, there's no reason why you would need to change that to something completely different. That makes no sense to me. When you have something where you're like, this is as real as I've ever heard anything sound, I absolutely adore it. But because IMAX specified different speakers, should I change my mind about something I already know I utterly adore? No way you should do that, and no way that you should be worrying about sustaining 122 decibels from 1 meter away. Just not anything you realistically have to worry about. I do kind of like, though, that they get very specific about the room dimensions, because those are like IMAX room dimensions. And if that's the feeling and the, relative distances to speakers and all that you want to go for, I would have no real problem with you going, hey, I like those specific dimensions. Pick out the one that works best and go with those, since you're, in the stage where you can choose the exact dimensions of your room. So I think those are the couple of things I would pick out of there. But there's no world where I would tell you to drop everything that you've already decided that you like and go strictly with these specs. No way.
I don't. I mean, the whole overly sensitive speaker situation thing is just, or being able to hit crazy dBs for that you're never going to really use for any reason.
No, I mean, literally, you do not want to sustain 105 dB at the seat. That is literally dangerous to your hearing. So I mean, what is the point of having a sound system where for actual personal safety, you would want to put in earplugs if you played it back at set reference, like what this system specifies as reference, which is much louder than a THX theater. That doesn't make a lick of sense to me. When we're getting into you might damage your hearing with this if you used it the way they spec'd it. No, that's just bad. That's just outright bad. When OSHA would tell you not to do it, forget it.
Yeah. So if you want to go with the curved screen and you want to use those ratios that they're going with, I would just make sure you get the projector that's going to get bright enough. I would also, like Rob said, upgrade the projector, because it doesn't make any sense not to. In this day and age. I would love to tell you to get an OLED or get a flat panel that will definitely get as bright.
This will not work. You can't
get one that's big enough.
No, unless they go micro LED, and even with as much money as Karl evidently has, that is beyond what they're considering. Yeah.
Jay and his wife were recently in Las Vegas. One of the casinos they visited had a 20-foot modular micro LED display showing videos, and it was their first experience seeing one of these micro LED displays in person. The closest they could get to was about 10 feet, and from that distance, none of the seams between the modules were visible at all. They could feel some heat coming off the screen from that distance, though. So it does seem like the power draw to run it is probably substantial. But what Jay noticed most was his wife's reaction. Her eyes widened when she saw it, and they both agreed it was very impressive. She's never lit up like that when looking at a large projection setup. So Jay agrees with us. This has to be the future of truly massive screens at home, right? We don't know. We think so, but we don't know.
I would think so.
If you have the money, you can just buy the consumer version of Samsung's The Wall from your local Best Buy. And it isn't just Samsung making these displays anymore. All of the major electronic manufacturers have demonstrated some version of modular micro LED displays now. So realistically, what's the holdup at this point? What's it going to take to bring those prices down and start getting these awesome displays into more people's homes? Some home theater aficionados might worry about them not being acoustically transparent, but someone like his wife couldn't care less about that drawback. And from the reaction she had to seeing it in person, if it were affordable, they'd be buying one right away, which was definitely not the case for a gigantic projection setup. What are our thoughts? Okay, there's a lot of things that go into a new display technology, and more so than you might think. First of all, that impressive reaction, or that reaction your wife had to that impressiveness, was very similar to my reaction my wife gave me when we first set up the OLED and watched Barbie. She was like, this is insanely good. This is so nice. And here we are a month later, and she's like, that's a lot of money we pay for that TV, and I am unhappy about the amount of money we paid for that TV. She actually said to me, it was really impressive when we set it up, but now it's just normal. It's just normal now. That's just what the TV looks like now. If I were to take the TV down and put the projector back up, she'd be like, oh my, that comparison. But you forget about that really quick. So let's just push that part aside. As far as rolling out a new display technology to the public, the amount of education that has to go into this is pretty massive. I cannot tell you how many people have said to me or emailed or sent via Facebook Messenger or whatever, micro LED displays like this will never work. You will always be able to see the seams. There'll always be there. It's just never going to happen. These are people that are enthusiastic enough about this hobby to know who I am, which is a small subset of people that are out there. Let me be honest. And they do not believe that it can be done in a home environment. They do not. They need to be convinced. Now take that and extrapolate it out to people who are never even heard of this technology, have only ever seen it as like the Amber Alert signs that go over your over the highway, and they think that's going to be what your TV is going to look like inside. There's a lot of education that convincing, and it's a non-trivial thing to get to that. So what's it going to take? I mean, a lot of things. It's going to take a lot of things, and including more of these displays coming out. Yes, the prices have to come down, but people have to see it, and they have to have the experience that you've seen. And that means that you have to convince stores like Walmart and Target and Best Buy to set these things up in such a way so that people can experience it. And there's also, like you kind of said, there's technological hurdles that haven't been completely overcome yet either. We don't know how these things have to be installed. I mean, we know the ones that are out there that have to be installed, but what does it look like when you as a consumer go to Best Buy and pick up
the 110-inch version of the wall?
A box of modular panels and then try to install them on your wall yourself. How easy is that going to be?
You don't really do it yourself. They definitely come with installation. So
that's right, and that's not really feasible in a situation where prices are coming down. People have to just be able to pick it up and do it themselves.
So I mean, following on the consumer side of things, from my point of view, like, in a way, I feel like as long as people can see the defining feature of this, and that doesn't necessarily have to be in person, in my opinion. I think this is something where advertising can get a particular message across, which is the modularity. I think that's a feature that sells itself, because if you can just demonstrate that, hey, you start out buying 4 modular panels, they click together like Lego, because I think we have to get it that simple, right? I think it has to be to the point where it is, you can just pick it up, you don't have to hire an installer to help you, and they click together as simply as Lego, and now you can put that on your TV stand or hang it on your wall, and then time for a bigger TV, I have a little bit more money, I buy 2 more modules, and they just click in, and that all just works. Like, that's a feature that I think you can just advertise on a regular commercial, and people will get it instantly and be like, ooh, I like that. I like that idea, that I can make my TV bigger without completely throwing out what I already had, replacing everything, and that I can just click these things together. I can carry it around so much easier. That type of thing I think consumers will get pretty readily. But the technology has to get to the point where it is that simple to deploy, and we're not there yet. Can you
imagine the being able to take one massive display they have in your room, unclick a bunch of panels, click them back together, put them on a different wall.
That's right.
And now you have 2 displays.
Yes.
I mean, people can absolutely wrap their heads around that, but we were talking about earlier with the installation, it has to be something that can be done. Easily, and we are nowhere near seeing that sort of solution out there yet.
And so on the technological side and on the bringing the price down side, the major thing there, without question, is that they are still being forced to use what's called a pick and place method of physical production of these. Samsung has improved upon that by being able to create like little wafers that have multiple micro LEDs on them, and then honestly, like a robotic arm picks and places the wafers rather than literally micro LED by micro LED, which is how they started. That's brought the prices down from over $500,000 to around $100,000. And Samsung has improved the efficiency of, instead of having more smaller modules, now it comes in like 3 basically 55-inch TV sizes, and you snap together the 3 flat panels like that, which helps, some just logistics things, shipping and storage and all those types of things, helps bring the price down a little bit there. But what everybody is waiting for is inkjet printing. That is the thing where you can just lay out substrates, inkjet print, whatever the light emitting thing ends up being. That, TCL has demonstrated that, Sharp has demonstrated that, but it's still in prototype phases. I mean, Samsung, LG, Sony, they're all working on it too. But everybody knows that once you can get to, we have a substrate, and then we have inkjet printed light emitting things, that's going to be where we can get it to mass market. There's still going to be some things with actually snapping together the modules, but I'm not too worried that can't be overcome. They're already really close as it is. And then we've already seen with something like the brand new iPad Pros, where it's like based on existing technology, based on OLED technology rather than micro LED, You can do things like dual layer, which improves the efficiency, lowers that power draw, but allows you to have 1,000 nits full frame. And if you could click together multiple iPad Pros, like we're getting closer and closer to the idea of this being something that could be consumer friendly. And then on top of that, like Samsung and others as well, but Samsung is the most ahead in this, developing the electroluminescent quantum dots, where there is, in addition to red and green quantum dots, a blue quantum dot, so that you don't have any sort of underlying has to go through another layer. It's just quantum dots emitting the light directly from a TFT backplane. Quantum dots are relatively easy to inkjet print. So like maybe the future is not micro LEDs. Maybe it's going to be quantum dots, or maybe it's going to be OLEDs. All of these things are inkjet printable. We combine that with modularity, and that's where I kind of foresee all of this really going. I don't necessarily know that it's actually going to be micro LEDs that become the most consumer friendly, because they're really having trouble inkjet printing those. they kind of have to do a pick and place type of manufacturing with that. So I think it might be a combination of stuff that's all in development, has all been shown in prototype form. It's not like we're literally inventing this stuff from whole cloth and only imagining it. It does exist. It physically can be done, but it's bringing the manufacturing processes. So I still think we're a ways away, but I think modularity sells itself, and we will, for that reason, I do believe we will get there eventually.
They just have to. Like I said, there's the production side of it, and then there's the consumer side of it, and how the consumer interacts with it. And if you can make it so that the consumer can just like command with those command strips, just stick it to a wall. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, like, people get tablets. It's not like people don't understand what tablets are. The idea that, I can put a bunch of tablets side by side. They have no bezels, so there's no gaps in between them. And now I've turned a bunch of tablets into a gigantic wall covering screen. People get that. So I think that's too compelling an idea to not to come to fruition. But yeah, we're still a ways away, unfortunately.
Raf in Australia. Raf is planning to get himself new self-powered studio monitor speakers. It's a multi-channel setup, and he wants to get a new front 3 LCR set of speakers. He's strongly leaning towards some Atom Audio A7 series monitors that use our MLM multi-layer mineral woofers and X-Art folded ribbon tweeters. The regular two-way A7V model goes for about 1,200 Australian dollars. It's $800 here in the US. Being fully self-powered with its own built-in DSP and active crossover, it has separate built-in amplifier for each driver, 15 watts for the folded ribbon tweeter, and 90 watts for the 7-inch woofer. It's expected to deliver a max peak output of 105 dB at a distance of 1 meter, which is pretty close, but that's fine.
But if this is a monitoring setup, that all makes sense. Yep. Nothing out of the ordinary there.
Then there's a larger 3-way A77H model that goes for $2,000 Australian, 1,300 US. It uses the same folded ribbon tweeter with the same 15-watt dedicated amp, but below that tweeter, there's a 3.5-inch mid-range driver with a 55-watt amp, and then the dual 7-inch woofers on either side of the tweeter mid-range stack. Sounds like a center channel with a 200-watt amp to power those two drivers. Naturally, just from their looks, no grills available, by the way. These look like fairly typical bookshelf left-right with a dedicated 3-way horizontal center model, but the Atom Audio specifies that the folded ribbon tweeter is mounted in a rotatable waveguide so that both models can supposedly be used either horizontally or vertically. Despite the added mid-range driver and second woofer, the larger A77H is only expected to deliver 106 dB peaks at 1 meter away, rather than 105 dB peaks specified for the A7V. So does that indicate that the tweeter is the limiting factor when it comes to its max output?
I mean, that's a reasonable,
assumption.
Assumption. Yeah, it makes sense.
Something's limiting it, and shouldn't be the fact that you added one woofer and it only got 1 dB left.
Right.
Shouldn't be the case.
Given that we do have identical tweeters and the identical amplifiers, and I did just kind of want to touch on that because we talked, it was last week or the week before, this idea of like going all the way back to the idea of bi-amplifying and, separating out that, the tweeter gets its own dedicated amplifier, and then the often mid-range and woofers share an amplifier, or maybe you only have woofers, maybe it's a two-way design, and people who are taking out the jumpers in the back of their dual binding posts and bi-amplifying and being like, I have, This speaker says it can support 500 watts total, so I'm going to have a 250 watt amplifier for the woofers and then a 250 watt amplifier for the tweeter, all by itself. And it's like, no, that does not add up to 500 watts going into that speaker. The tweeter is drawing so much less power. So here's a nice indication where they're like, yeah, this is bespoke, purpose-built, self-powered, and they're like, yeah, that tweeter, to reach the same output level as the driver needs 100 watts or 90 watts. The tweeter, 15. Considerably less is going to that tweeter, and this is, purpose-built for that. This is bi-amplified. No question about that. Fully active crossover inside. But yeah, I do think that tweeter is probably maxed out. They designed it.
He's naturally drawn to the larger model, and if money were no object, he'd probably just get 3 of those and call it a day. But he does have a budget that he needs to stick to, and price-wise, getting 3 of the smaller, less expensive two-way monitors would be favorable. So what is our educated guess on how much of a compromise it would be to use 3 of the A7V rather than 3 of the A77H? Would putting a two-way A7V on its side and rotating the waveguides of the tweeter 90 degrees truly provide good dispersion, even with a single 7-inch woofer over on one side of the tweeter? Is there a world in which it would be worth the added cost to get a single A77H to use as a center along with a pair of A7V front and left right speakers? What combination would we suggest that you get? Well, I wish I knew how close he was sitting to these things.
Yeah, I don't have an actual distance on there. Although, honestly, by the specs, doesn't make a tremendous difference.
No, there's no world in which I get the bigger ones, I'll be honest with you. I just get the three smaller ones. I think that sonically, you're not really gonna unless they're tuned differently, they're not getting any louder. So you're not paying for extra output. So what are you really paying for?
I mean, greater bass extension. By the specs, they have greater bass extension when you have the dual woofers. So that's kind of the thing.
You're going to be crossing them over, right? I mean, you're going to cross them over?
It sure seems like it, because these are fully intended to be crossed over to a dedicated subwoofer and B-bass managed. They're absolutely intended to be that way. But yeah,
so what would be the reason in a normal world that you would buy the bigger one, right? Is that you can reach that the crossover region has enough bass output, enough volume so that you cross over cleanly into your subwoofer, right? But these things are, really not. Why they're not getting any louder? You can't drive them any harder, really.
Not particularly.
What's the point? I don't understand the specs of these things. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is a little bit. It is really just about added bass extension. That's pretty much the entirety of why the larger model exists.
But going lower does not help you. You need to go louder, and that's why you would want to have.
Oh, well, that's why you and I would normally change out a speaker. But I mean, he's sort of just worried about, intuitively, you look at the A7V, the two-way, which clearly looks like a normal bookshelf speaker when it's standing vertically, but it's like, if you were to use it as a center, he, just for height purposes, would be turning it sideways. You can rotate that tweeter, but now the tweeter's beside the woofer. It's just like, intuitively, does that mess up the dispersion of the speaker? The truthful answer is we don't entirely know, because I have not seen polar response plots of this speaker. It is absolutely the common thing that with any form of ribbon tweeter, the vertical dispersion of that tweeter is narrower than the horizontal dispersion. And further to that, they've put it inside of a waveguide. So I would anticipate that, yes, this definitely has much wider horizontal dispersion than it does vertical dispersion. That's a pretty safe assumption on my part. That is why they allow you to physically rotate that tweeter if you do rotate the entire cabinet of the driver. Now, if you have that very wide horizontal dispersion, and that's the main point that you're going after, if the crossover is designed properly, and this is an active crossover, so that is very, very adjustable and allows for very, very steep roll-off slopes between the low end of the tweeter and the high end of the woofer, there's no technological reason that I'm seeing here. Again, I don't know for absolute sure. Maybe if we had all the polar response measurements, we'd be able to notice if there's something that's gone awry, but there's no technological reason why they shouldn't be able to do this properly, to the point that as long as you aren't looking at it and letting your brain do the weird thing of, I see the tweeter slightly to the left of center, and now I think everything is coming slightly from the left of center, because your brain can do that. Your brain can absolutely do it, just like it can make you 100% believe that the sound is coming directly from an actor's voice when the speaker is physically placed above or below the screen. Your brain can do that sort of thing. And so I sort of appreciate that he's like, well, these don't have grills. I am going to be up close on these speakers. I know myself well enough to know that there's no way I'm not going to be able to look at that tweeter slightly over to the left and not think that the sound is all coming from slightly to the left. Like, that's not really unreasonable if you know that about yourself. That might be the only reason I would say, oh, well, just get the visually symmetrical H77H, but I would only get one of them, and only for that reason, not really for any performance reason that I can come across. If you just will be able to take our assurance that as long as the crossover is done properly, having that really wide horizontal dispersion of the tweeter absolutely allows you to place it to the left of the woofer, and there's no problem doing that. Also, this is a studio monitoring setup, so it's like you're not really worried about seats to the left or right of you. Like, you're sitting smack dab in front of this thing. You're probably the only listener. So unless you're wildly moving around while you're monitoring whatever it is that you're mixing in this
keep
setup.
your head still, dude.
Yeah, like this just isn't an issue. So if price matters more and you're willing to take our word for it, and I'm pretty confident, because I mean, Atom Audio is pretty darn good in the monitoring space. They don't typically have horribly designed, horribly measuring speakers. That would be a real oddity for them. Given
this
the
is also a
design,
studio. I mean, I imagine he's mixing. So do you really need to turn any of these on their side for like placement issues?
Yeah, I mean, is there a way to just adjust things so that if it's bothering you visually, you just have the A7V standing vertically as a center? Because it's not that gigantic of a speaker.
I mean, for me, it's like this is a situation in which function trumps form in like every sense. Like, that's just the whole point of this setup is
the
for that.
A7V vertically isn't very much taller than the A77H horizontally, because the A77H has the mid-range below the tweeter plus some cabinet space. So I'm like, I think you can probably just use an A7V vertically. It might require that you raise your computer monitor like an inch or two, but if that visual, incongruity bothers you too much, that would probably be the solution.
Yeah.
I say get the three smaller ones, three identical smaller ones. That's what we say.
I don't really see the other than
benefit.
the fact that the benefit, other than it just looks more impressive to you or something. I don't really see the benefit. I don't understand what the thought process was behind Adam's decision there. Mohsen in Australia. Last year, Mohsen, 2 Australians back to back.
Yeah.
First wrote us to ask about adding a new external amplifier to his setup in his enclosed 15.5 by 19 by 8.5 foot home theater room with clip speakers all around. I guess we probably told him not to buy one.
You can guess, Tom.
Not much in the way of room treatments and dual SVS PB3000 subs that were both at the front of this room. Boy, I had a couple of things to say to this man.
Could have been.
You might be able to guess that we had suggestions for things he should do before spending money on an external amp, and now that he's back, and we have had quite the impact on his home theater. He has blacked out his walls and ceiling, including putting black velvet on his front wall, which is noticeably improved. Hit the perceived contrast from his ultra-short throw projection setup. He is currently still using his Yamaha RX-V 2085 receiver, which tops out at 9 speakers max. So he has forgotten about surround back speakers, and he's running a 5.2.4 configuration with matching clip speakers all around. He has repositioned his dual PB3000 subs with one on the front wall, just to the left of the center speaker, and one on the back wall, just to the right of the second row of seats. He also set his Yamaha output to dual monaural.
Dual monaural, yes.
Yeah.
Dual mono.
Dual mono, basically. Subwoofer signals, even though it gives an option for front and rear subs. He had a whole bunch of a whole bunch more, which I think he had none before. Acoustic panels, and even he reran Wipeout after all of that. Even I stuck in there. He has a lot of acoustic panels, which I approve of. This is acoustic panels galore. You, sir, are a man after my own heart.
I like the subwoofer replacements. I like everything
Cue the
that he's
people
done
saying that his couch is too bright and will be reflecting light.
Sure.
Cue you Redditors out there who are like, oh my God, throw a black something over that. Oh,
this is ultra short throw. Ultra short throw, a little bit less concern about the reflection of light off the projector from the screen. Yeah.
Would you believe it? He thinks it sounds really good now. But we all know how home theater goes. Okay, so yes, he made massive differences. He's got a mini AC split.
He does.
AC mini split is what's called in there too, which is good. One thing is notice that if he doesn't touch the volume dial at all, if he switches the listening mode from Dolby Atmos, typically coming in via Dolby Digital Plus stream from a streaming service, in this case, to just regular 5.1 with only 5 speakers playing instead of all 9 in the system, the 5.1 version is noticeably louder by about 3 or 4 dB as compared to the Atmos version. Does that mean he needs an external amplifier? No, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the decoding and the upmixing and everything else. And that's everybody experiences this. You could put 1,000 amplifiers in here, all daisy chained together to give you 1 million watts of power, and you would still switch between Atmos and regular DTS or Dolby Surround, and you would still notice that difference.
Plus, do you have the ability on that Yamaha AV receiver that you're still using to turn the master volume up 3 or 4 clicks
no.
above where it is? Have you literally turned it up as high as it goes? Because if the answer is no, and it better be no, there's no world in which you should literally have maxed out the volume dial on this thing. If you have the ability to turn it up 3 or 4, then it means that amplifier power, just the existence of amplifier power, is not what's creating that 3 or 4 decibel difference. Yeah, that is entirely on the mixing and mastering side of things. I mean, one of the things is going back to original Dolby Digital versus the newer Dolby Digital Plus and Dolby True HD, and then the Atmos extensions on top of that. Dolby actually did like kind of redefine how the dialogue normalization level is all figured out, because everybody transitioned over, instead of from decibels, just regular decibels C-weighted or decibels unweighted, to this LUFS scale, this K-weighted scale. That's come into effect. The streaming services are definitely using the LUFS scale now, the K-weighted scale, and that thankfully has been somewhat standardized, and I'm noticing a little bit less difference between streaming services now. It seems like the industry kind of is getting on board finally, where there's a little bit less variance, but they've all settled on this LUFS K-weighted scale, which in general is a little bit quieter than the old original Dolby Digital mastering levels. So this is entirely to be expected, and as long as you have 3 or 4 dB clicks that you can go up on your master volume dial, you can even it out again, and it's not because you just ran out of amplifier power because you started using more speakers in your setup.
So with everything else that we suggested now taken care of, he's back to his original thought that he might like to upgrade his AV receiver. He's still considering a Denon X6800H, which goes for around $5,000 Australian, because he's curious to maybe give front wides a try. My wife would be so angry with me. I spent $5,000 on the receiver because I thought I might want to add a couple of more speakers to my system.
Yeah.
Straight to jail. Straight to jail.
Doesn't seem to be his situation, though.
No. But then he came across a combo deal for an Anthem AVM-70 Pre-Pro with a 7-channel tone winner amplifier for only $7,000 Australian, and he just can't help but salivate over the idea of switching to separates. What do we think? Is that difference in volume between 5.1 Atmos due to his Yamaha receiver running out of juice when powering on 9 speakers? No. And if he simply wants to replace the Yamaha receiver now, what route should he take? There is no world. First of all, I understand the allure of separates. You have to understand, Rob and I have been in this game a lot longer than many people who listen to this podcast. We have been doing this for so long that there were real, maybe not so real, but real-ish reasons to want to switch to separates, that people could make and often did make somewhat sense. These days, there's no real reason to want to switch to separates. Occasionally there's like mathematically you actually do need more amplifier power than any mass market AV receiver has built in, so you can absolutely get to where that makes sense. It used to be that you were like worried about the outputs, the pre-outs of the AV receivers not being very clean or not putting out enough voltage and all these other things. All that's kind of gone. Yeah. By the way, I mean none of that's true. Like there's very few setups where, like, absolutely mathematically you can get to the scenario where my front 3 speakers they would genuinely benefit from having external amplification, and we have no problem with that because you can calculate that. But there's very few setups where at least 2 or 4 or 6 of the speakers in your setup would be
legitimately underpowered by the amplifiers that are built into the AV receiver. So the combo of having an AV receiver as the processor and then powering some number of speakers and then maybe legitimately having a need for some external amplification for some of the channels, like that combination we can absolutely get to. But the idea of like just the fully dedicated pre-pro, no amplification built in, and paying a higher price for that than its sister model, which always exists these days. Like, I mean, other than maybe Trinov, right, or Storm Audio or something.
Yeah.
There's basically no companies out there that are making pre-pros that don't also have a sister receiver model. The idea that you would pay more for the pre-pro model just because it doesn't have amplifiers built into it. I mean, obviously the reason is because they make so many fewer of them, so it's economies of scale. That doesn't make a lick of sense to me. So, like, I get it. You had an idea at least a year ago where you're like, ooh, maybe it's time I get a separate amplifier and I have those beautiful lights on the front of it and I get to run a new dedicated electrical circuit to my theater because I can just justify all that. And like, that's the thing I'm going to do. And we're like, no, do all these things first. He's like, okay, I did all those things. Can I get my amplifier now? And we're like, well, there's no mathematical reason for you need to do that. And like, I'm not going to say, hey, you can never get a new AV receiver because there can absolutely be feature reasons why you might want to get a new AV receiver. Now,
you want surround backs back. Could
be.
That's one of the reasons why you can.
He does have 2 rows of seats. Maybe he wants to try 6 overhead speakers. I'm not going to say you're not allowed to do that sort of thing. You don't have a HDMI reason to do it at the moment because you're using an ultra short throw projector. So none of those are doing 4K 120 or HDMI 2.1 stuff. So we can't say that's the justification for it. But if it's like, yeah, okay, I just want to try 6 overhead speakers, or hey, you know what? His setup is one where it's like you could put front wides in here. That's not against the rules. There is space on your side walls. You've got a setup where that could make sense. I like front wides. Rob H likes front wides. It's like, so yeah, if that's the reason, but just go into it eyes wide open that you're not going to be getting some kind of massive change or improvement to the sound quality of all the speakers you already have set up. Yeah. This is going to be a minor upgrade for thousands of dollars. And still aren't going to be buying an external amplifier to do this. There's really no reason, unless, well, I mean, in his case, he could go, if he got the 6800H,
right,
he could
need an external amp,
add 2 more channels to go to 13 speakers in there, which in his, like, I still don't see why you would add surround backs in here, but you could go to 7 speakers on the floor levels, which includes front wides, so the regular 5 plus front wides, and then that's 7 plus 6 overhead speakers. You could do that. That's 13. But honestly, you would power the additional 2 speakers that the 11 built-in amplifiers can't power. You power that with like a Fosse amplifier. There's no reason with the speakers you have that you need some kind of big beefy amplifier.
I almost want to say, just buy an amplifier. Just so that you just to do it, because I think you really want one. And there's okay.
I mean, like we said, I have one. Tom has an external amplifier, so we can't say it's against. It's not. Of course, it's not against the rules. And if it's just going to bring you joy just to have it, then yeah. But
people buy things that they don't need all the time. I mean, they upgrade the paint job on their car. They my parents just spent a ridiculous amount of money on, on plants, because they, like the flooding that we had last year with all the hurricanes and stuff like that killed like a ton of plants. Mm-hmm. And so they had everything redone, and they love gardening. They love going out, but they can't do all of it themselves. So they pay a company to come in and do everything, and then they maintain it. Mm-hmm. And that gives them joy. I think it's a complete waste of money. If I had I would just salt the earth in front of my house and then fill it up with rocks so that I didn't have to do anything with it. And then, every once in a while go out there with a blower and blow whatever leaves and grass came on. I mean, they have dirt. If it were up to me, my neighbors would revolt. But, there is no reason why you can't say, I do not need an amp, but I would like to have one. Sure. I am going to buy an amp, and I'm going to buy a 2-channel amp for my front 2 speakers. Okay. And because I don't need 2 channels, much less 3, so I'm not going to buy a 3-channel amp. Buy a 2-channel amp for my front 2 speakers. Now I have a 2-channel amp, and I don't need it, but I want it, and now I have it. And if in the future I decide I want to upgrade my AV receiver, or my whatever else, I will have a 2-channel amp in case I get into the situation where, hey, it does front wides, but I don't have enough channels for front wide. So now I've got this 2-channel amp that I can use to
ready
do
to
that.
go.
You could do that. I will give you permission to do that.
Yeah,
but
I like that.
I think front wides are stupid. I understand. I mean, I have front heights, and I can name all of one movie where I was like, oh my god, look at the front heights. Yeah. I mean, I can't remember the name of the movie because I was like, at the time I was so surprised. I was like, took me out of the movie. Like, my front heights are doing something. Very rarely do they do anything. I think front wides are the same situation. Most of the time you won't notice them. Occasionally you'll be like, oh, that sounds pretty good. Yeah. And then that'll be the end. So
I like Tom's idea. Like, if you're just like, I've had this idea, I want to get a nice amplifier, we have no problem with that. But I like his idea of, hey, spend a little bit less, get yourself a nice 2-channel amp, because that can be utilized in the future for sure, no question about it. But you're not going to crazy overspend, but you're going to get yourself, it's going to scratch that itch.
$7,000. You've lost your freaking mind. I'll be honest with you.
If you are looking to spend something in the range of $5,000 to $7,000, to me, the only place you're getting a genuine, like a difference has actually been made, and I didn't just imagine it, that would be switching the AV receiver to something with more features. I'm telling you, it's probably not worth that amount of money, the change, but at least it is an actual change. Whereas if you're spending that amount of money on an amplifier, you're not, in your situation, getting something that I could ever say is honestly worthwhile. So I like the idea. Spend a lot less, get yourself a nice 2-channel amp, and scratch that itch. There.
Yeah. Adam has a fully enclosed dedicated home theater room. It's 11.5 by 23, and it's all blacked out. He's got a 120-inch projection screen on the front wall, and the front rows of seats are 11 feet away. He's had the setup completed for a while now. He's been using the Epson 5040 UB projector. It's a very nice looking setup. The speakers are all in the room. That's not like one of that.
He's got a little antechamber outside with the double doors leading in from the right side wall. So, yeah, I like this setup a lot.
4 overheads,
mounted high up in the corner between the sidewall and the ceiling there. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got like the I'm in timeout seat up in the front left corner.
There's so many little extras. It's way over to the side there.
Very nice looking setup.
Nice looking setup.
The 5040 UB can technically do HDR, but was kind of early in terms of HDR on projectors, and with its limited HDMI bandwidth, and only do HDR if the frame rate is limited to 30 frames per second or lower. For games, he definitely prefers 4K 60 support over being limited to 4K 30 if he wants to use HDR. Yeah. And sports and home videos honestly look better when he can use the higher frame rate as well. But their iPhones shoot video in HDR, and they invested in a new camcorder that also shoots HDR. So he did his best to get HDR working on the new 5040 UB again. He set up multiple different picture profiles. He activated the frame rate switching on his Apple TV 4K that is used for playing back most content from his Plex server via the Infuse app. But he basically concluded that each individual piece of HDR content needs its own custom setting in Epson's menus in order to look its best, and there's no way his wife is going to mess around with all of that. So it was enough of a pain that he just went back to locking everything at 4K 60 SDR and leaving it at that for now. So before he buys something new, is there any chance he somehow missed some easy setting in the Epson that would make HDR a pleasure to use? I'm gonna say no. But
and I'm going to agree with Tom. Yeah,
he strongly doubts that, given how much time he spent on this. But why not ask, right? Yeah, I don't think so. Unfortunately, and I know this sounds crazy because HDR has been out for a while now, and frame rates are not. It's not like they just invented frame rates last year or anything like that. But switching all these things and getting it to work seamlessly, it's just, you would think that they could just put a team of engineers on it and they would just make it work. And they did. And it did until it got into people's homes, and then it stopped immediately working correctly. And unfortunately, that's just sort of, it just takes a lot more years of iterations for them to kind of say, oh, these are the new bugs we found with our last AV receiver, or our last projector, or our last TV. Let's work those out. And they work those out. And then Onkyo comes along or whatever and says, hey, we can lock down the EDIDs now with our Integra model. So why don't we do that?
Only took a couple of decades. But yeah, no, I mean, honestly, the 5040 UB was almost the reason amongst like the home theater crowd on the forums and stuff that the Oppo Blu-ray players were so popular. Yeah. Because the Oppo players had the thing where they could really nicely convert HDR to SDR, retaining the wide color, and then people would lock their Epson 5040 UBs in standard dynamic range. They would never let them go into the Epson's HDR mode on the projector, but they could still get some of the HDR experience because the disc player, the Oppo disc player, was converting HDR to SDR, and that's why the Oppo players were so popular and have remained popular to this day. Like, they're selling for more than when they were brand new, because some people out there still really want that excellent HDR to SDR conversion. But of course, it wasn't the case that it only worked for discs, because those Oppo players had an HDMI input on the back of them, so you could also put other sources into the Oppo and use that Oppo video processing. So that's one of the reasons they remain popular to this day, is their very good HDR to SDR conversion. So it's in your setup, it's not like there's something in the Epson that you just overlooked and would suddenly make this easy to use and make everything look really good. It was like, no. Pretty much everybody at the time was like, hey, is there a way to convert HDR to SDR so that I don't have to use the HDR mode in that 5040 UB? So, nothing you did wrong. Absolutely not.
So if getting a new display is the only way to get good SDR and HDR handling, what's it going to be? He's considered switching to a 98-inch LCD. He can fathom spending as much as $5,000, but he really can't go higher than that. Definitely not $20,000 for the 97-inch OLED.
Yeah.
It would be very noticeable downgrade in screen size, because remember, he's at 120 inches.
He's at 120, yeah.
And since he doesn't want to deal with repositioning all of his speakers, he'd only want to bring the seats forward by 6 inches, no more. Yeah. Which, if you look at the overheads and stuff like that, that makes total sense.
And he's got in-wall surrounds. Yeah. I get it. That makes sense.
Yeah, I get that too. He's looked at Epson's current projector models, the 5050 UB and the laser-driven LS12000. They do seem like upgrades over 5040, but is their handling of HDR honestly that much better? We've talked about how we like JVC's frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. Is that really the only way to go if he sticks with the projector? Because those prices because those prices are sure to get above his budget like immediately. So honestly, what do we think he should do? My guess is the 5050 is still not that recent of a projector, and I don't know that it's going to be that enough of an upgrade for you. For me, the JVC the lamp-based one is still going to be my go-to, which is still, I think, in the $5,000 range, right?
So the MSRP is $6,000. So, of course, if you just looked it up on the website, he's like, that's already over the budget I wanted to sell. Completely reasonable, but it is definitely available to purchase for $5,000. And if you don't just add to cart on the places that are selling it that way, it can be, gotten for under $5,000. Not tremendously so, but, into the, $4,750 type of range is pretty common street price. Now, that's a lot of money, right? Like, it's right up against the upper limit of your budget, but if you honestly want the projector that's out there that lets you keep your 120-inch size, that doesn't force you to move seats or change your setup really in any way other than swapping out the projector, that MP5 is a really, really nice projector that handles HDR as well as any projector does. That's as good as HDR gets, and the handling of HDR on a projection setup, that's as good as it gets. So if that's enough for you to say, okay, I'm willing to spend my maximum budget to get as good as projection get without compromising anything else in my setup, like, I am pretty wholeheartedly in favor of you doing that. It's just that, that's a lot of money. The issue to me is that if you step down a little bit in price to the LS12000, it's like, it's like $1,000 or $750 or so street price wise. It is a cost savings, but it just isn't as good as the JVC full stop. It doesn't handle HDR as well. It handles HDR better than your 5040 UB, and it gives you a pretty simple to use 16-step slider that, if you are tuning it content by content, it is just a slider that you bring up, and honestly, your wife doesn't have to worry about it. You just set it at the default, and she's not going to care that, some of the HDR highlights blew out to white, she's not going to be the person who cares about that. You are, and you can use that slider. It's not that bad. The LS12000 also supports 4K 120, so you talked about gaming on this, so you can go all the way up to that, but the NP5 also supports 4K 120, and then is even better and even easier to use in HDR, so it's like, if you can afford it, I know we're stretching the budget to max, but it is under the budget you specified, and it is the best experience. And even I, who's a big fan of these 98-inch LCDs that we're getting now, I'm like, 120 down to 98, that's very much noticeable. You've already completely blacked out this room and put up a really nice screen. So I'm like, and it's not like you're saving a bunch of money going to the 98-inch LCD. It is just a lot brighter. It's a lot brighter than the MP5, but I'm sort of in favor in this instance. getting that JVC MP5. I think that's the right move.
I agree. I do want to say that, and I know you don't want to hear this, and it's not what you want to do, clearly, by how you phrased your question.
Sure.
We often talk about it's free to move your seats, right? It's free to move your seats. It's closer, and now your screen size, your field of view is larger, or the appropriate size. That's not the only way that you can improve that field of view. The other way is to move the TV into the room.
Yeah.
And I know you don't want to do that, but yes, you could. And I think there is an argument to be made for getting that 98-inch TV and then moving it into the room and the speakers along with it. You'd have to move your front speakers along with it, moving the whole thing into the room, because you are going to get a lot more light output. You are going to get better HDR performance. You're going to get all the stuff that you want, as far as...
because we're talking like a TCL QM8 is right at that price point, and it is loads brighter in those HDR highlights. But like the QM8, as many local dimming zones and the mini LED backlight that it has, there is still some blooming, and there's no blooming on your JVC projector. So I mean, there's trade-offs to everything. Yeah. But it's just that, like, because the price delta isn't really, and he is like he's not like he said there's no way I want it. He is considering it, but I'm sort of looking at that price delta and then everything else around it, and because that MP5 is out there, I'm like, there is a solution that is probably the lowest effort, similar in price to what you'd pay anyway, and then doesn't make you change anything else in your setup. So I combine all of that, and I think that's the way to go. Yeah.
I will say though that I don't know what HDMI cable you ran back to that projector, but that might also have to change. Yeah. And if it's in wall, that's one of the things that was like, I'm never going to be able to put another projector back there because my in-wall HDMI cable certainly is not going to support. Yeah,
because you do want an HDMI, an ultra high speed HDMI 2.1, the 40 gigabits bandwidth, because the JVC has it. The JVC has that bandwidth.
Let's not assume that your HDMI cable. I'm not assuming, and you shouldn't assume either, that unless you know for sure that it's a ultra high speed certified.
This was installed when he got a 5040 UB, so it almost certainly is not an ultra high speed HDMI cable.
So if you don't have conduit back there, you might the easy solution may be just to get either an ultra short throw, which we're not discussing at all here, something at the front of the room, and simply because running that HDMI cable could be a huge problem. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's easy. But let's just not forget that just because you're like, oh, well, I can get this new projector and the receiver will work and everything will work better, and then you realize that your in-wall HDMI cable, which is locked in there and not coming out at all.
He does have his gear in an alcove outside of the home theater room there, so that is definitely an in-wall HDMI cable that's been run. Yeah,
let's not forget that part of it. Yeah. So on a totally different topic, they tend to just use AirPlay as their whole house audio solution. Since he has always had extra AV receivers on hand, he's just used those. Or since he has had an Apple TV device in each TV in their house, they can play AirPlay to any of those. But he's got a couple of rooms where they'd like to be able to play music, and they don't currently have an Apple TV device in there. He just wants a small, inexpensive, i.e. not Sonos amp, which seems to be overpriced to him, AirPlay amplifier that can power a pair of speakers, since he already has an extra speakers on hand that he could use. What do we suggest? Rob suggests something. I have to go to the bathroom. How much time do we have left on this thing?
Well, we should at least 10 minutes here. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention the WIM, WIIM products. They have their WIM amp. They've actually announced brand new models that are coming out above the existing WIM amp. It's like the WIM Amp Pro that's coming in there, but there's not particularly much reason why you need that for this particular use case. The existing WIM amp would do a nice job here. Now, it is $300, right? It's not super cheap, but it's definitely less expensive than Sonos's Sonos amp. No question about that. Certainly supports AirPlay too. Pretty much all the streaming services. Nice app, nice integration, and people who own this really, really like it. People are big fans of WIM and everything that they're supporting at prices that are pretty reasonable, lower than Sonos. So I can certainly give a thumbs up to that. Now, there is another company doing some kind of similar things to WIM, maybe with slightly not as beautiful industrial design. Aerolic has their H50, very similar idea, wireless device, sits on your network, and has AirPlay 2 support, similar ins and outs, has a subwoofer output. has optical in, even has a HDMI ARC input there, and then just a couple of binding posts to connect up your speakers, RCA inputs, and sits on your network. So that goes for $250. Not a gigantic difference in price going to the Aerolik H50 versus the WIM amp. I think the WIM amp has the nicer design, and people in general, people who have left reviews on these things, seem to be a little bit happier with the WIM products. They really like those. The way that WIM has done everything on the app side of things as well. So might be worth the extra $50 there, but I think that would be the way to go. All right, Tom's not back yet, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to Nathan. So I gave my explanation a couple weeks ago for why I don't really want to get into specifics, digging into the various individual room EQ techniques that we're seeing being promoted on various YouTube channels and on forums and things like that. Nathan totally agrees. The biggest problem is that, unlike video, we don't have a really well-established, nearly universal industry standard and definition for exactly what we're measuring for, and exactly on some kind of diagram how far away we are from that industry standard. We have that in video, but we don't have that for audio. We don't have that industry-wide standard when it comes to exactly what the EQ for any given room in your audio setups would be. So he's asking, the CTA, CEDIA, they brought out that RP 2022 document, the Recommended Practices 22 document for designing and installing and then certifying to their standards home theater builds. This is sort of based on, widely now agreed upon best practices that CEDIA and the Consumer Technology Association have come up with. They basically just wanted to provide a language for designers, custom integrators, installers, various contractors, and the homeowner. They wanted to have this common language that everyone could speak in to say, okay, here's the performance parameters for the room itself, for the construction of this room, for the soundproof level of this room, and then the equipment that's going to be going in there. What decibel levels are we hitting? What are the viewing distances? What are the viewing angles? All those types of things. So it's not exactly a true standard in that sense, but it is a collection of recommended practices. So I'll let Tom go into the next paragraph since he's back.
I am back. Sorry about that. Are we hopeful, as he is, that this will at least provide a starting point? Obviously, people will remain free to endlessly debate about it and to go on their own way for whatever they think sounds best in their own room. So could a published document by the CTA and CEDIA at least provide a point of reference to start to help clear up some of this confusion?
Yeah, I left out a point there when I was talking last, which is that they are in discussions. They're like publicly discussing on their own forums, their own podcast, CEDIA podcast and things like that, that they're in the process of formulating and releasing a recommended practices document. They'll probably just have the number of whatever year it actually does come out. But for the next step, which is measuring, like let's standardize how we're going to measure our rooms, what software or equivalent, what microphones or equivalent, what microphone procedure are we going to say this is our recommended practice for taking measurements in your room, and then tuning the room. What EQ are we going to apply based on those measurements? They're in the process of doing that. They're like aiming for that to come out in 12 to 18 months, but RP22 took like 2 years longer than they had intended. So right off the bat, I'm saying if they ever manage to get to enough of a consensus that they're able to create this new recommended practices document for measurement and equalization inside of rooms that have already been created, I'm like, I don't think it's going to happen in 12 to 18 months. These things always take longer than that, maybe like 2030 if it ever comes out. But then, it's like, do we think just having that some kind of common language you can point to, some kind of semi-standardized process, is that going to help clear this up?
I have so little faith in humanity that we could ever get to this point. I mean, the real problem here is that in almost every argument, there's two sides. There's the people who are more numbers and scientific side. The numbers people who want to look at the numbers and the numbers alone. They don't care about anything else. They don't care about aesthetics or personal preference or subjective experience. It's immaterial to them, and that's not a good way to go about doing things most of the time. Going simply numbers driven, where this podcast generally is very numbers driven, sometimes can lead you astray. You end up with something that's, for example, we talk a lot on this podcast about getting a flat frequency response, and people are like, I got a flat frequency response. It's perfect. Look at these great measurements, and you guys are telling me it's great. It doesn't sound good. Mm-hmm. We never said it was going to sound good. we said that it was going to be accurate.
Yeah.
And accuracy.
Now, when the signal in whatever recording you're listening to says to play something at that volume, right, and says to play a completely different frequency, but at the exact same volume as that first frequency, that is what's happening now.
Yes.
But
yes. So when we, so then you're going to have the other side, which is going to be, this should be, having EQ in your room is more of an art than the science, and you have to have experience, and you have to know what people really like, and you have to talk to the clients, and you got to do this, and and I find that most of my clients, they want this, and this is therefore we should have this curve,
or this is how I've always tuned rooms, and I've never had a complaint. All my clients have always said that they enjoy the end results. Yeah. There's the whole other side of it too, which is that on the video side, the standard didn't come from the consumer end of things. In fact, they kind of railed against it for decades. Yeah. The standard came from the production side of things. That's where all of the video standards originated. And it's only relatively recently that the consumer side of things has finally gotten on board and said, well, wait a second. If everybody who was involved in the making of this movie or TV show or commercial or, music video or whatever it was, everybody on the video side of things all was looking at monitors that were calibrated to the same standard with these very well-defined color points and gamma and light output levels and everything now. Doesn't it make sense that finally the consumers look at the same thing, at least as a starting point, to say, okay, I'm legitimately seeing it the way everybody who worked on this movie saw this thing. That all flows and makes sense. The audio side of things is just different because unless the CTA and CEDIA are somehow going to get the production side of audio to all agree on this is how everybody across the industry tunes our mixing and mastering studios. Yeah. Like we're just, the closest we have at the moment are Dolby's standards, but not all music is mixed to Dolby standards. Definitely not. So maybe on the movie side of things, we're pretty close to a standard. And of course, I have zero doubt in my mind that if the CTA and CEDIA manages to get to some sort of consensus, it's going to be based on the Harman research. It's going to be based on those. We know what an accurate speaker looks like in an anechoic chamber. We know that when you bring that accurate speaker into a real room, here's the general response, which is still a range in Harman's research and was based on, a steady state things, not just an on-axis, sweep tone generation, but it's going to be based on that research. I have zero doubt in my mind if there's any chance of reaching any sort of consensus, that's going to be the only thing that has a hope of punching its way through. And we're basically already seeing on the enthusiast side of things, everybody's going that direction anyway, because it's kind of the only thing that makes sense, So I think that one way or another, we're going to get to, because Harman's stuff was all based on, wait a second, we took a bunch of listeners, experienced and inexperienced. We had them listen to a whole bunch of different stuff and basically just say, here's what sounds the most realistic. Here's what sounds the most normal. Like nothing is particularly jumping out at me when things are tuned this way versus this other way to say, well, that just sounds weird, right? Like that doesn't sound like a real concert. That doesn't sound like a real life event. That doesn't sound like a real human voice anymore because something is either too loud or too quiet in the relative responses. We reach this sort of natural inclination, and this happens in studios too, where they're being individually tuned, to just say, well, what we're trying, the overarching view is what we're trying to do is make sound stuff kind of like real life. It doesn't make sense that if I'm trying to play a recording of a concert at home, that it wildly sounds different than a real life concert. Like that just doesn't make a lick of sense to anybody. So we naturally end up back at where Harman ended up because that's the only thing that logically makes sense. I don't even really know that best practices are necessary. I think that we're almost sort of falling into that general consensus. It's just that we can't point at a single line. That's what everybody wants, right? We want to be able to measure with this microphone in this manner and point at a single line and say this is right or wrong because people love that organization in their minds. But I don't even think it's necessary. I think I think what needs to change is getting everybody away from the idea that we have to come down to a single line that can be declared as either right or wrong when it comes to audio.
Yeah. I'm gonna just leave it there because I could probably talk about this
That's
for
right.
hours. Yeah. Joe's a previous guest host on AVRant.
He was.
Yeah,
Couple of the weeks that you were away, Joe filled in.
So we recently talked about comparing speakers at home. We said it would be fine to just bring in a pair of speakers. No need to bring in a whole 5-speaker set. And you likely use something like speakers A and B or main zone and zone 2 to switch between the two pairs of speakers fairly quickly. But going back to Harman's research, when it came to directly A/B comparing two different speaker models, they determined that listening in mono, oh my God, I hate this, to just a single speaker at a time, the two different models centered in front of the listener was the most reliable way to detect speaker differences. So that would be even easier and cheaper. Yeah, good luck buying one speaker, but whatever. Just bringing in one speaker at a time to test, and you could just use the left versus right channel controls, balance controls. Mm-hmm. Those exist. To instantly. No, they don't. Where? On my AV receiver?
Many do, yeah.
I do not have a left and right balance control anywhere on my den that I can think of. I don't think I've seen a left outside of my car. I haven't seen a left-right balance control in forever. Maybe on an external amp. I've seen it on that. To instantly switch between one speaker to the other. Might that be a better way to audition new speaker candidates? No. It is not. Let me tell you all the reasons why. First of all, you're now just going to compare center speakers, I guess, because that's the only speaker that you can easily get one at a time.
I mean, certainly some manufacturers do let you buy, individual bookshelf, individual tower, but not all.
Less likely.
Not all. Many the box that they ship in, it ships in pairs.
Yes, it ships in pairs. So there's that. Number two. First of all, this is the easiest way to identify differences, minor differences between two different speakers. Okay, this is true. What you are talking about is true. Okay, but that is not what we're really trying to identify when we are A/Bing speakers.
We don't need decision.
No, for a purchase decision, we need to know if one speaker is clearly superior to the other. Because you want to know if the more expensive speaker is so much better that it is worth the extra money. You don't need to know if it's a little bit better, because it's not a little bit of money. It's almost never a little bit of money. It's like, this is a $500 speaker, this is a $1,000 speaker. Is this double better than, because it's double price, is it double better? And for that, you do not need to know that. You do not need to know if there's minor differences. You want to know if there's major differences, number one. Number two, I think I'm on. Number three, left and right, switch back and forth left and right, that's different information most of the time.
It certainly can be, yes. Well, I mean,
in a stereo recording, it is almost certainly going to be somewhat different left to right. So now you're not listening to the same thing.
Well, unless you do a down mix to mono, split mono.
What down mixes to mono? What does
your AV receiver? Your AV receiver can down mix to mono.
How does it down? What settings do you put it on to down
mono
mix
listening
mono?
mode.
I have not. Again,
and you go into the audio settings and you say, when I do mono listening mode, do I do split mono to left, right, or do I do center only? And you often have that choice.
Okay, if you can do that, that's fine.
Yeah,
I've not even tried to do that.
Or I think since Joe has a separate thing for doing his 2-channel audio listening, he's looking at like a stereo receiver that has left-right balance, and But you still have to have a mono recording, otherwise, you're running into that issue.
Right. So I mean, to me, this is like an academic exercise. They set this up. They're like, what is the easiest way for people to detect differences between speakers? And they're like, this is how we did it. And we found that when we tested, 5.1, 5.0, 2.0, 2.1, and mono was the way to go. Yeah. Mono, that helped them really lock into the differences, no matter how small they may have been. They more accurately picked up one speaker over the other. Yeah. Okay. But that's not what you're trying to do when you're doing your A/B listening tests at home. That isn't it. I mean, I can't imagine what situation you would be in where you're like, I need to detect the smallest difference possible because these speakers look exactly the same. They are priced exactly the same. Every other aspect of the speaker, I cannot take one over the other. Yeah. Therefore, I must find a minor, minuscule performance difference in order to
it was
choose.
Like the Harman mono conclusion was a little bit more like on the speaker design side of things, right?
Yeah.
Where like they're changing the mid-range driver. Like
Right.
some little parameter of the mid-range driver, and then they take it to the anechoic chamber and they measure what the difference shows in there, but then they're like, but what's the audible difference? And it's like, yeah, so they set that up. Mono, can we tell, this version of this mid-range driver that we're considering putting in this speaker versus the second version of the mid-range driver? Is like, what's the measurable difference? What's the audible difference? And yeah, you have to do that in mono. There's pretty much no question about it. But one other aspect that Tom did mention, I'm sure he's thought of it, but I'll just mention it here is, I want to get a sense of that stereo imaging too, because, the mono isn't going to tell you a whole lot about the off-axis dispersion and then how the pair of speakers image together to create a nice phantom center, and I want to know how that's working in my setup, because my room and my seating position and my acoustic treatments and all the rest of it has a big impact on how the imaging is going to sound in my particular room. It might sound a little different in a showroom or some other room or in an anechoic chamber. So I want to know the stereo imaging part of things too, and I'm only going to get that if I bring in a stereo pair of speakers. So yeah, I think for auditioning purposes, I'm pretty much always bringing in a pair. It also doesn't preclude you from listening in mono if you bring in a pair.
Yeah, I mean, if you really care that much, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I think that,
but the bringing in only one speaker does preclude you from listening in stereo. So
yeah,
one.
So in Joe's own setup, he's got an acoustically transparent projection screen on his front wall, and behind that screen are his left, center, and right speakers, which are Sonos in walls. He's also installed Sonos Cinema Select cabinets with Sonos in-wall speakers as his front wides, and he had a completely separate pair of Martin Logan Ascent speakers that he strictly used for 2-channel listening. He decided to make some changes. He sold off those Martin Logan speakers, and with the new SVS Ultra Evolution series having recently been released, he figured there'd be some used SVS Ultra systems for sale from SVS owners who have decided to upgrade. Sure enough, he found a whole used SVS Ultra system for sale at a great price, so he snapped it up and gave the Ultra Towers a listen. He liked them enough that he's considering keeping them, using them for 2-channel music, and also replacing his whole Sonos in-wall front soundstage, LCR plus wides, with SVS Ultras. The towers would go just to the outside of his projection screen, as he's always felt the front soundstage was a little too narrow with all 3 front in-wall speakers behind the screen. Totally get that. With the Ultra bookshelves would become his new front wides. But what to do about the center? He has his projection screen exactly where he wants it, and it's ever so slightly too low to fit another SVS tower directly below it as a center. Jesus.
Yeah, it's true.
There's actually a cubby space in the front wall just below the screen. He's considering temporarily removing his screen, bringing in a single SVS Ultra tower, putting it in that cubby, and seeing if having 3 identical SVS Ultra towers across the front is as ideal as he is hoping it will be.
It won't be.
It won't be.
It
will not.
I'll just flatly say that right away. It is not going to be as ideal as you're hoping it's going to be. I mean, yeah, the thing that Tom is correct about and always mentions, even if, you got 3 identical speakers, left, center, and right, even if they're all positioned the same distance away from the front wall and all of that, like, they still don't literally sound identical because they have different sidewall reflections, slightly different ceiling and floor reflections. Like, all of that comes into play, and they never sound fully identical. But then you're going a step beyond that and talking about recessing it into a cubby in the front wall that the front, left, and right speakers are not recessed into similar cubbies. There is no way that a center tower is going to sound as identical to the front, left, and rights in that scenario as you're hoping it will.
Yeah.
No chance.
But with his total unwillingness to move his screen even a couple of inches upwards, and since the screen is already acoustically transparent, what if he were to build his own in-wall cabinet for the SVS Ultra Tower drivers, remove those drivers and crossover from the original cabinet, and make his own in-wall center tower that lives behind his projection screen that way? What if, and hear me out, you just bought a center speaker and put it underneath this dang thing?
I think that setup already came with an Ultra Center.
Just do that.
Yeah.
My Lord.
And it's okay that your screen is still acoustically transparent. It can
still be, it doesn't care.
It doesn't care. Or you can, if there's room, you can put acoustic treatment behind the screen now, like maybe in the cubbies where the speakers used to go. That's what I would do.
You have a bass strap back there. Yeah. Yay.
Fill that cubby for sure.
No to all of it.
This is definitely, I bought wholesale that the ideal is 3 literally identical speakers across the front. I bought that wholesale. I've never had it to this point. Or, I mean, he did have it. He had 3 identical Sonance in-wall speakers, all vertically arranged behind his screen. So he did have it. So maybe he bought in. That worked out well. So he's like, well, there's no way I can take a step back to using something like a dedicated center speaker that looks different and has a different cabinet than my front left and right towers. So, but I think this is entirely 100% mental and not experiential in this case, because that ultra center is really good and matches really well with those ultra towers.
Think of the upgrade of having a huge bass trap in the front of your room. Think of that, and then make it happen. Yeah, and then use the ultra center. And
definitely.
The tweeters don't all have to be the same.
We
height.
can 100% see that he already has a way of putting a horizontal center speaker below
there is a
screen.
picture.
It's right there, and it's really not having that tweeter very much lower than the tower tweeters. Like it's maybe an inch or two,
maybe
at most, maybe. This is not a compromise to use the dedicated center.
I'm just gonna say
it really is not.
The 2 co-located subwoofers at the front of the room are triggering me pretty hard right now. I'm going to say that. Oh, they're not co-located. They're to the center of each of the centers. They're just to the sides of the center speaker. That's co-located. They are co-located. You could have stacked them on top of each other.
I think Joe has 2 more at the back of the room, though, which is totally fine.
I know. That's why I'm not saying anything. He's wondering if he can convince himself that his existing Sonos in-wall and in-ceiling speakers that he uses for surrounds and overhead remain good enough to match with his SVS Ultra Series wides and fronts. The Sonos speakers are pretty darn neutral, as are the SVS speakers. They ought to be a reasonable match, right? By all accounts, can we help convince him that he doesn't need to upgrade all of those just for upgrading's sake?
I cannot. Because
I don't think I can convince you not to take all the drivers out of a tower speaker and try to put them in the wall.
Yeah, we never actually answered that directly. There is no world where I would tell you to remove all the drivers from an SVS tower, build your own in-wall enclosure, and put it behind your acoustic transparent screen. There is no world where I will tell you that that's the thing to do. Versus just keeping and using the SVS Ultra Center you already have.
OLED panel. I'm planning on taking the back off of it and all the electronics out and then mounting it in my wall so that it'll be perfectly flat.
Right.
Do you think this is a good idea for me to do,
the
Rob?
G-Series. just get the G-Series that sits perfectly flat on the wall. Yeah.
You did not start this conversation with, I have been building speakers professionally for 20 plus years.
Joe really knows his stuff. He's purely having some fun and bouncing ideas off of his.
So I understand
that's
that
why
too.
we're taking a little bit of a ribbing against Joe, because we know he can take it, and he knows that we know he's not literally 100% serious. My
lord, if any of you have ever thought, I could just take the drivers out of this thing and shove them in a wall and then just make sure the internal volume is about the same with no bracing whatsoever.
Well, I mean, we did have our listener who took the KEF driver, right? Because that was just one driver with one tweeter concentrically designed into it, and because he needed something that he could mount on his ceiling, created an on-ceiling cabinet that had the exact same internal dimensions as the original driver, and he did that swap, and we were okay with that, and because that all, you can see how logically that makes pretty good sense. There's no way I would do that with the tower drivers. So I mean, honestly, because I mean, Joe, getting back, already has the SVS towers on hand. This isn't a theoretical or a hypothetical. He has them on hand.
Just test it.
He's already heard them. So this is one where I'm inferring a little bit here, but I think what's going on is he's listening to that. He's listening to it with his Sonance in walls and his in ceilings, and because he is very aware of the change that he has made and what he is listening to, he's like, Is there a little timbre mismatch there going on between my surrounds and my overheads and my new front ultras? But he's granting himself the fact that he hasn't completely optimized that setup yet, because he isn't even completely sure he's keeping those SVS ultras, so he hasn't totally optimized the setup. Is that the only reason that the Sonance in walls and in ceilings don't perfectly timbre match those, or is it all in his head? Like that's the question that's driving a man mad.
I will tell you, and this is for everybody else. This is not for him.
I know. Yeah.
Timbre mismatch, when it happens, it's not like, oh, I wonder. Is it not right? It's like, oh my God, why does it sound so weird? Yeah. That's what timbre mismatch sounds like. It sounds like something's broken.
Sure.
That's what it sounds like when the sound pans across the room.
That's right.
It's like, this sounds like a car. This now sounds like a car inside of a can. It now sounds like a car again. That's what happens when there's a timbre mismatch.
It isn't good enough to use something like the first X-Men movie where Professor X's voice is bouncing around into the surround channels while he's talking to Wolverine when he first wakes up.
Yeah.
That's not a good enough test because there's a whole bunch of distortion effects on Professor X's voice at that point. Yeah. So it didn't necessarily sound like an identical voice coming from every channel to begin with. That was like in the mix. So it really does need to be something like a fully circling pan sound, like a bespoke test tone sound for that sort of thing.
Because I mean, even the movies when cars and stuff,
right.
the most common thing is going to be a car or a plane or a spaceship or something going by. They've already built into the sound that the Doppler effect is there.
That's right. Yeah, that happens.
So that's going to be part of that. And so what are you hearing? Are you hearing? I mean, it should sound natural as it goes across. And if it sounds, but it sounds different. Yeah, it sounds different. That's what naturally it sounds like when the car moves across the front. The Doppler effect happens. And those of you that don't know what that is, that's when the sound as
if you're
car is coming
moving
closer to
towards
you,
something that's making a sound, those sound waves compress, and so the frequency goes up. And then as you're moving away from something that's making a sound, the sound waves stretch out and the frequency goes down. Yeah.
So, yes, there's every bit fiber of my being says just use the center that you've got. I think it's going to sound great. I think that once you live with the system for a little bit and just experience it, just sit down and watch a movie.
Fully optimized, do a full calibration, because I don't think that's actually been done yet.
I would guess that's true as well. Then get your Sonos overheads are going to be just fine.
There's
surrounds.
No chance that I would ever replace Sonance in-ceiling overhead speakers for anything other than I went to something really far afield.
Yes.
For all the rest of my speakers, that is nowhere near neutral, because those Sonance in-ceiling speakers are about as neutral as they get. So if other speakers are anywhere near neutral, then same would go if I had RBH in-ceilings, right? Like there's no way I'm replacing those. The surrounds, if you're the absolute most critical listener, I mean, hey, SVS will sell you some surrounds that you can mount on your sidewalls. They had the SVS Ultra surrounds that were those trapezoidal shape and mount really nicely on the side walls. So those could be out there if it absolutely bugs you. But this is one we know you're going to test yourself. But there's no way there's no chance I'm replacing the in ceilings. I would maybe consider the side surrounds. I would never consider the surround backs if you have them either. No chance.
And Rob's got matching speakers all the way around because he's a weirdo. So he actually has done the experiment. He's actually done the experiment where he's like, these are all matching speakers. They're all timbre matched all the way around.
They really are. I can compare them up front in mono, and I'm like, man, that's a good timbre match.
It is. And
surround backs don't matter. The front heights don't matter. I can put just about anything there.
We're so insensitive to some of these sounds. It's just hilarious. And people understand this, but they somehow don't when it comes to how they think about their home theater. Because you understand that you can't hear sounds from certain directions very good.
Yeah.
You understand that because when you're outside and there's a sound coming from one of those directions, you turn.
Right.
To hear it better.
Yeah, to hear it much better. Did I hear what I think I heard vaguely
you don't even
behind
know.
me? I need to turn around to find out.
Right, and you're not even exactly sure which direction it came from either. You're like, you kind of pan your head back and forth trying to echolocate
we all naturally cock our head a little bit so that we get as much 3-axis separation between our two ears. We all naturally do that, and we instinctively, it's not experientially, it's like we have a little like what do you call it, calculus inside of our head that knows exactly what that angle should be. We all instinctively do it. So do dogs. You ever seen a dog cock his head? We all do it.
It's crazy, and we're all sort of in that same boat, and we know that, but yet when we sit down and think about home theater, that's
FOMO.
where we go awry.
All it is FOMO, Tom. It's 100% FOMO. These things are not literally identical. Therefore, I know they're not literally identical, so maybe I'll hear it. Oh, no.
Yeah. I just want to make sure. I only want to buy once. I want to buy once. And I totally get that. Many times on this podcast, I am of the opinion, hey, buy once, cry once. Get it. Okay. Get the right thing. get
I mean,
the right
for most
thing.
people, but for home theater enthusiasts, that's never the case. As soon as they have it, everybody comes to say, what's next?
All right, Rob, who we got left?
I put one on here from Steve. This wasn't actually literally a question from Steve, but we had a little very short back and forth on social media, and I was like, hey, that's kind of an interesting topic. So, yeah, that's fine. That'll absolutely keep. There's nothing pressing for us, so we'll talk about that next week.
All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. I want to thank Raph for going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 133 patrons over at patreon.com.
That's right, Raph. Thank you very much for your PayPal donation. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 133 paying patrons over there.
So I want to thank Mohsen, Adam, and Joe for sending us notes of gratitude. Thank you, guys.
For sure. Mohsen, Adam, Joe, thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We very much appreciate it. Big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.